Right, after getting organised, good morning everyone. Welcome to this morning's Cabinet meeting. I am Richard Clare, Leader of Wiltshire Council and Chairman of the Cabinet, so I'll be presiding over the meeting. We've had some changes to Cabinet since our last meeting. Mark McClelland stepped down as Cabinet Member for Transport, Waste, Street Scene and Flooding. He was appointed as Special Advisor to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, John Glenn. I wanted to thank Mark for the work he's put in particular the work around the white lining programme, the gully cleaning and the fly tipping work, which is showing significant improvement, and wish him well in his new position. And we'll be in constant contact with him, particularly around budget settlements and councils. As a consequence, I've appointed two new Cabinet members, so I'd like to welcome Councillor Nick Holder as Cabinet Member responsible for environment and climate change. It makes sense to bring the entire environment portfolio together in one group, so I'm passing the climate change element over to Nick. I will still be heavily involved with UK 100, as I'm sure you're all aware of my intense interest in the area. And then Caroline Thomas is Cabinet Member responsible for Transport, Street Scene and Flooding. Wish them well in their new roles. There have been a couple of changes around portfolio holders as well. Bill Parks is coming on as portfolio holder for Waste, and Rich Rogers as portfolio holder for, I'm going to get this wrong, procurement, commissioning and contracts. Thank you. Before the meeting starts, if I can ask each Cabinet Member to introduce themselves, we'll start with Jane this time, just because she's not ready.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jane Davis and I'm the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Send and Inclusion.
Good morning, I'm Phil Orford. I'm Cabinet Member for Housing, Strategic Assets and Asset Transfers.
Good morning, I'm Caroline Thomas.
Mike's not on. No, it is, sorry.
Good morning, Caroline Thomas, Cabinet Member for Highways, Transport, Street Scene and Flooding.
Morning, I'm Councillor Laura Mays. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills, and Deputy Leader.
Nick Botterill, Cabinet Member for Finance, Strategic Planning and Development Management.
Good morning, Nick Holder, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Ian Blair-Pilling, I'm the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Libraries, Public Health, Facilities Management, Operational Assets. You'll see missing from that list Public Protection, which now sits to my right as a part of Environment.
Great, thank you. If I can ask all other speakers, including members, to introduce themselves the first time that they're called to speak. So if I now formally open the meeting, encourage all those watching the live stream to access the agenda and agenda supplements, which are available on the Council's website. I have apologies from the meeting from Councillor O'Neill, who is suffering from COVID. It's not gone away yet. Do we have any further apologies? We then come on to the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 22. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? Ian.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Ian Thorne, Wiltshire Councillor for Cairns Central, leader of the Liberal Democrat Group. Can I welcome, as you've done equally, Nick and Caroline to their roles and wish Dr. Mark, as I always called him, Dr. Mark, the very best for all of our benefits and all of our behalves in terms of his new role at the Treasury. Yes, I've got a comment, if I may, Richard, regarding the minutes, which are always very, very good, in my opinion. And of course, they're not meant to be a verbatim record of the discussions that have taken place. But I would just like to add that one area that the minutes for the last meeting and the previous meetings don't tend to focus on at all is, I think, often the very helpful follow-up comments that residents and indeed members make in response to the responses from the members of the Cabinet. In other words, questions are asked, there's a response, and then there's usually quite an interesting discussion and debate that follows. And I seem to remember in this chamber last time, my colleague, Councillor Kate, made some, I thought, very important contributions. There was a gentleman that sat to my right, a chap called Owen Inskip, who made some very interesting contributions. None of these things appear in the minutes. And I'm just wondering, although again, it shouldn't be verbatim, whether those particular contributions, which clearly were important to the residents or indeed the councillors, and I think also add colour to the discussion, could possibly be included in future minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. As you say, minutes aren't verbatim. What you're suggesting, as far as I can see, is trying to party politicise them. I think that would be an awful idea. The minutes of this authority have never been done in a political way, so I would respectfully disagree. But do you have any issue with the accuracy of the minutes?
Well, I'm very happy with the accuracy, Richard. I'm not sure
Excellent.
whether
We will move
party
on.
politics
No,
comes
Ian,
into
if
this,
you don't
which
have
you're
any
now
issues with the
interested.
accuracy, we'll move on. Thank you. Does anyone have any issues with the accuracy of the minutes? In which case, I will move approval. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour? Thank you. We then come on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? We then come on to leaders' announcements. There are a couple of leaders' announcements today. Cost of living update. We'll be publishing a more detailed cost of living update. It's in essence a slightly revised, slightly built upon version of previous updates that we've published. I won't read out the full thing. Much of it we've heard before, and I'm not sure that we need to be reiterating that, but I think it is important that we keep bringing this back over the course of the next few months, at least while inflation is running at the levels it is, just to understand what is going on. As far as cost of living goes, for a summary of the resources and recent announcements, please look at the Council's dedicated cost of living page, which includes links to information for sources of national and local support. The interactive community directory, which we've mentioned several times, helps people to access food and warm resources in their communities. That continues to grow apace. Libraries continue to offer a welcome to all, and our wellbeing line is open for queries. There's more specific information with links to the published version, with links on the published version of this announcement, which will be going up very shortly if it's not up already. But I wanted to focus on a couple of areas we haven't publicised as of yet. Bus fare reductions over winter. It's worth noting that most single fares have been cut to £2 or less this winter, which makes the cost of using buses significantly cheaper. So Wiltshire bus users can now travel on most routes in the county for just £2 or less at times for a single fare until the 31st of March. It's been funded by central government. It's part of that bigger bus funding scheme. Similar schemes have proved interesting in other countries. It'll be interesting to see what the data shows from our perspective in terms of bus usage as a result. Support with winter energy bills is on the way for millions more households across the UK, with additional schemes that will include alternative fuels, something that's been raised frequently. There's a £200 payment coming through this winter. It took a little while for government to resolve that. It is now sorted. And then 900,000 households in England, Scotland and Wales without a direct relationship to an energy supplier. Those are people who are then perhaps in a care home or park home, will be able to apply online for £400 of non-repayable help with their fuel bills. Again, that was an area that was falling through the cracks and where government has put in the extra support. These schemes sit alongside the energy price guarantee, which saves a typical household in Great Britain around £900 this winter, and an equivalent level of support in Northern Ireland. Whilst Wiltshire Council will have a role in verifying addresses and administering payments, as of the 25th of January, the government's piloting the approach and the application portal hasn't yet opened. Support for boaters. Public Health have been working alongside the Economic Development UK Shared Prosperity Funding, UK SPF, to support the boater community who find themselves disproportionately affected by the cost of living crisis. This funding has allowed Public Health to mobilise an outreach programme with Julian House to support our boating community with emergency fuel and food vouchers within an extremely tight timescale to ensure that boaters secured the funding at a time of greatest need. The project was delivered through the 3-week cold period in December and helped 71 boaters and 4 roadside travellers with both fuel and food vouchers. Households were identified by Julian House based on eligibility criteria, low income, health condition, single parent, and children with health condition. The Rural Community Energy Support Network, delivered as a partnership between the Council and the Centre for Sustainable Energy, is looking to recruit people from communities who would like to be able to offer people in their community more support around staying warm and keeping their bills down. Volunteers will gain access to training and resources so they can offer energy-saving advice. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, or you know someone who would be, please go to www.cse.org.uk/RCESN or email warmandsafe@cse.org.uk. Again, those details will be on the website. The Warm and Safe Advice Service, it's continued to play a prominent role in Wiltshire's cost of living support to low-income households by providing energy, debt, bill advice, small grants, insulation advice and referrals. Since the beginning of October, the service has received 1,009 inquiries, made 144 heating and insulation referrals, 87 priority service register sign-ups, and provided 26,000 in food and fuel vouchers, distributing £30,328 of surviving winter grant to Wiltshire households. The Wiltshire Installs project is delivered by Warm and Safe Wiltshire and has been particularly busy this winter. The scheme aims to provide new boiler repairs, fuel and food voucher support to households that can demonstrate that they comply with the strict eligibility criteria, which is low income and having a health condition. Their energy needs are off the main gas network and they have a prepayment meter. We don't create these criteria, we just administer the schemes. The scheme has supported 209 households since the beginning of October 2022 through a mixture of prepayment meters and food vouchers. In addition, 11 new boilers have been fitted where households had a no heating situation. A testimonial from a resident helped by the scheme: I didn't realize how living in a very cold house was affecting my mental state. I really believed I was coping with my log burner, hot water bottles, everything thermal and duvet. It wasn't until the new boiler was fitted that I realized how absolutely awful it had been. Then support for households relying on life-saving equipment. Warm and Safe Wiltshire has worked in partnership with both the Integrated Care Board and Adult Commissioning to identify households that rely on life-saving equipment who are disproportionately affected by the high energy prices. Through November, families have been offered support through the provision of food and prepayment vouchers. 13 families were supported by that scheme. And then community caseworker. We've increased the ability to support council, primary care, NHS and voluntary and charitable organisations with outreach work through the Community Caseworker Project, Warm and Safe. That's allowed us to deliver 24 events outlining Warm and Safe service and referrals route available to organisations to allow households ease of access into the service. In addition, this role has allowed us to provide one-to-one support and advocacy to people in crisis. As I've said, there is more information on the website, so please have a look there if you want to get further details. The issues that have been raised previously are particularly around those two groups where you've got people using fuel tanks and then people who are paying for their heating through a service charge have now been addressed by the government, which is good news. We've just got to see that coming into effect. We've got a really long agenda. Really quickly, please, Ian.
To say two things, if I may, Richard. Firstly, I congratulate the council on what you and officers have been doing. I think it's impressive and it deserves congratulation. So hopefully there's enough time for me to congratulate you. My second point is, and I know this is tough in terms of the relationships that Wiltshire Council has with housing associations, but given that one would imagine, in general terms, that a lot of those people who are affected more than others by the impact of the cost of living crisis are people in social housing in one form or another. I'm just wondering what more we can do, should we be required to do so, to encourage housing associations, social housing providers across the county to be as proactive as we have as a council. And I'm minded by virtue of an experience I had last night with a resident in a home in Caen where water was dripping through the ceiling, and in fact has been dripping through the ceiling for the last 2 or 3 years. So I'm just wondering, it's a helpful question, hopefully, what more we can do to influence the performance of housing associations to deliver the type of comprehensive approach to the crisis that we're facing in terms of Wiltshire Council's contribution. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, the simple answer is there is very little we can do as an authority in terms of housing associations. They're independent bodies and they operate as such. I think if we're being specific, all of the projects that we are talking about, or almost all of them, are available to the entirety of the residents of Wiltshire should they qualify. So government support has been significant. If you look at our own council housing, we've made sure that we've been stepping up the support that we're providing. We've already got officers who are providing that assistance, making sure that people are claiming the appropriate benefits they ought to be claiming. I cannot recall the numbers, but the first year that we did this, It was I risk getting the numbers wrong, so I'll let Phil or someone correct me. Do apologise if I get it wrong. But I think it was about £198,000 of extra benefits were claimed in the first year that we had these extra officers operating, and they've continued to operate since. This is money people are entitled to, they ought to be getting, and it's making sure that people are claiming it. We're also upgrading our own housing stock to an EPC-B. Housing associations are compelled to upgrade theirs to an EPC-C. It would be great if they could do more. Some are. I am not aware of Wiltshire's ones doing that. There is one of the ones in Southampton is certainly going a bit further. I've had some discussion with them through my UK 100 role. But I think we have heard in my assessment, and I've been critical about some of the larger housing associations in the past, we have heard a number of stories where housing associations are perhaps not performing to the way we would expect them to, the way we would want to behave as a tenant. I don't want to oversimplify that. It can be very, very tricky when you're dealing with housing cases, particularly when you're dealing with issues with a tenant who may be resisting allowing access, and so there can be a lot of factors that can play in. However, I've heard enough recently that would suggest that a couple of our housing associations could be doing more. My advice on that would be twofold. Firstly, by all means, if you've got a specific case, let me know and I will make sure that something formal goes from my office to that housing association saying, look, buck your ideas up. That may or may not work. I've had some success with that in the past, in other cases not. I would probably suggest raising it with an MP as well, because they do have some sway with housing associations. Housing associations tend to rely on central government funding. Therefore, if central government says something, it's perhaps got slightly greater impact. But also, if you've got a particularly difficult case where you're not getting headway, probably at that point, we ought to be raising it through Phil and officers as well to make sure that we are then, if there is something that we can do to try and compel. But very difficult area. And some housing associations are really good in the way they approach this. Others are perhaps not performing as well as we would like. Phil, yeah, by all means.
Thanks. I think you've said a lot there, but what I would add as well is it's always worth making sure that tenants do go through the complaints procedure within the association. I mean, quite often we do have tenants, they're unsatisfied, they're not happy, they've spoken to the housing association and they've left it at that. They're not necessarily satisfied with the work's being done. So if the work isn't satisfactory, go through the complaints procedure, make sure you exhaust that. And once that's exhausted, then our officers can step in, but you can also go to the Housing Ombudsman. So there is a process we can follow too.
Okay, and I think we've probably said enough. I won't go any further. The other announcement I wanted to make, I attended the Salisbury, I'm going to get the name wrong again, Disability Information Group last week, who raised a number of issues with me. It was very, very interesting. I sort of did a disability audit of Salisbury back when we were looking at the marketplace, and it was quite eye-opening going around on various forms of mobility aid. I came very close to breaking my leg when I clipped a bit of raised ironwork in what was then the marketplace that was a car park, which again demonstrated the kind of challenges you face when you're leaning on something and relying on it as you're moving around. But they raised several issues which I've passed on, but one that they raised was around disabled parking. It was an interesting discussion. They were suggesting that, for the most part, some would have liked it to have remained free, but others were saying that they felt it was quite reasonable to pay, but that there was an issue about the length of time that people were taking to both get out of and into their vehicles and when moving around. Okay. And the length of time that they were taking to move, moving around and doing things that they were doing, and particularly that if they came close to the end of a ticket time running out, it could be very difficult to get back. I turned up a bit early to that meeting. I was doing some work in my car. I was about half an hour early, and I'd watched the cars pulling up with the other people who were going to attend. And again, it was very interesting watching quite how long it was taking them to get out of cars, and access the equipment they had, and to then get themselves out of the car and into the room that the meeting was going on at. I've had a discussion since with officers, had a look at various thoughts. They made a good point. So we are going to be introducing, as soon as possible, an extra hour for disabled blue badge holders at the end of their parking period. They'll still be needing to pay for a ticket, but there will be, in essence, an hour's grace period at the end of the ticket. So if you buy a 1 hour ticket and it would expire at 11:05, they will have till 12:05 to do it. Discussing with officers, they think that the costs, it's impossible to precisely pin down the costs, but something probably under 10,000. And discussing that with finance, they think that is something that is quite easily dealt with inside the budget. It may not even be a cost at that level. So effective as soon as we can get the relevant sort of order through. I'm not sure if we are going to require a TRO or not, but that will be coming into effect. No, Parvis? No? Fine. So as soon as we can get the information, signage changed and information out to people, that will be coming into effect. Right, if we then move on to item 6, the budget. You'll hear far too much from me at the budget at full council. I will save the political knockabout for then, but I will ask... oh, sorry, I've missed questions. I'm sorry. I've missed out public participation questions from councillors. We have had a number of questions. I think none of them pertain to items on the budget, so we will be handling them all now. Celia Beckett, is Celia with us? Celia, you've got your questions and answers. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please. Thank you for your answers to our questions, acknowledging the problems in Staverton. I'm not sure whether the Cabinet is aware that Hilperton Marsh in Site 5 in the local plan is adjacent to Site 4 in Staverton. Therefore, the traffic problems in Staverton will be compounded if the Hilperton Marsh area is developed. The lack of infrastructure, inadequate road networks and severe flooding would appear to create an unsustainable plan for the northeast of Trowbridge. Does the council consider that it would be more appropriate to spread the proposed development around Trowbridge, including brownfield sites? There are more sustainable areas where there are better road networks which are closer to services and employment in the town centre. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll ask Nick to come back, but I have a horrid feeling the answer is going to be wait for the local plan.
You've stolen my thunder.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Look, I mean, these arguments about where to concentrate development are, and the viability and the sustainability of relevant sites is the meat and two veg of the local plan and the local planning process. And so, yes, I'm afraid you will have to bear with us a little bit longer until later this year when the draft plan will be published. But I can reassure you that those arguments are the ones which officers are considering, and they are at the heart of it.
Thank you.
Thanks. If I then come on to Kevin Parrott. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your response to my question. I'd just like to further ask that it was stated in one of the responses, or probably all of them, that as part of the local plan review, the council will have to be sure that any associated infrastructure is viable and deliverable. So I'd like to ask, with this in mind, can the council assure Staverton and Hilperton residents that the development on sites 4 and 5 will not go ahead without the appropriate highways infrastructure being built, including Staverton bypass and a suitable link road to join up with the A361 on the Devizes Road? Thank you.
Well, as I've just said, I can't predict or make up on the hoof now solutions to these problems, specific solutions. I have to, yes, of course, development has to be deliverable. There's not much point having a local plan that includes a whole load of stuff that has no chance of ever being put into practice or carried out. The precise solutions that will be proffered for the plan that will be in draft form released will take account of all these sorts of things. But I can't say specifically now what that might be, because of course we don't know which of those sites and to what degree and so forth they will be feature in the final plan.
Thank you. If we then move on to Dr. Jimmy Walker, I don't think I've seen Jimmy here. No. Colin, I think we're covering your question under the cabinet, the budget itself, so we'll come to you in a second or two. So we then have Councillor David Vigar. David.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to you and the officers for the answers. I'm Councillor David Vigar, Councillor for Trowbridge Grove. First thing, just to say for the record, last time we spoke here about this, you speculated as to whether I might have a conflict of interest as both a host and sponsor and a councillor. I've spoken to the monitoring officer. He's confirmed that sponsorship of Ukrainian refugees does not fall under the government-defined disclosable pecuniary interests or the other interests that this council has identified. I'm talking about this because as a sponsor, I regularly talk with other hosts and guests, and as a councillor, people ask me what the council is doing. And following on from that, my priority is to find areas of agreement rather than to accentuate areas of disagreement. I think we agree that many Ukrainians living in Wiltshire now want to live independently, renting rather than being hosted. We agree that
David, this is a supplementary question rather than a statement.
I am getting, it's just, excuse me, a little bit of preamble.
We've got a huge agenda.
Yeah, and this is the only opportunity that we have today to discuss the welfare of 1,000 people who are refugees from a war zone living in Wiltshire. So let's just give them a little bit of respect, can we?
Okay, let's get to a question, please.
People may not have spotted the answer, so I'm just going to give, in order to tee up the question, let me just explain what the answers reveal is that 230 families have moved on from sponsorships, most have been rented accommodation, 53 families have been found new hosts by the Wiltshire team, a credit to the team, but 358 families are still being accommodated in sponsored hosting arrangements. The council now has 11.5 million of central government funding, of which only 1.8 million has been spent, and the Stone Circle Housing Company has not yet housed any Ukrainians in housing, and the council has not attracted any suitable candidates for the post of case officer working with Ukrainians on rental options. Hosts are saying things to me like this, and I'll cut the quote.
Please,
down to
can we
one.
come to a question,
I
David?
wish Wiltshire offered more practical help in the middle ground to people who are not homeless who want to work beyond sponsorship. Supplementary to these, do you agree with the government's definition of the purpose of the central government funding that you have received, that we have received as a council, 10 million now, as being to provide support to families to rebuild their lives and fully integrate into communities?
I think government has just revised some of the guidance they've got on the criteria for how funding needs to be used. We're assessing how we're going to deal with that at the moment.
Okay. Do you agree that helping Ukrainians find rented accommodation is a major priority?
I think it's important to make sure that Ukrainians are able to move on to appropriate long-term accommodation as soon as possible, yeah.
Okay. I just noticed the questions that I received last night. Question 10 was a quote from another sponsor who said the main issue the council needs to face up to is to produce a plan to pilot their guests into rented accommodation. Asked if you agreed. The response that was given in the email I received last night was that guests are able to seek and move into rented accommodation where they choose to live. Updated guidance has been published. We're reviewing this guidance. This morning, the answer had changed. It read no. Why did the answer change?
The answers that were published, officers pull together answers, they are then come to cabinet members for approval. I wanted to be really clear on this. From a council perspective, the idea of using limited funding to top up unsustainable levels of rent that would then run out and leave people with the need to move is not the appropriate way, in my assessment, to be housing people. We need to get them into tenancies that they can sustain. Otherwise, all you're going to end up with is bad credit histories and people in a significantly worse position.
Wouldn't you agree that we should be using the money not from the council's perspective, but from the Ukrainians' perspective? It's been given to us to use on their behalf.
Absolutely, and they are supposed to be here for 3 years, I suspect, at least. Therefore, the idea of using the money on a one-year fix that then creates a significant problem is, to my mind, a really bad way to use it. We want to fix this problem so people are in long-term, sustainable tenancies, sustainable accommodation. And the idea of spending money on rent top-ups that will not be affordable the moment that money runs out is not sustainable.
Don't you understand that? Okay, the last question. Alongside the house purchase process, do you not understand that you call paying rent subsidies or all the support you could give for rentals, and there are many things you could be doing, helping with deposits, helping with guarantees, and the government guidance, latest government guidance says that councils can guarantee rents. You could be employing somebody to help the Ukrainians into rental because you advertise this post as a 12-week post at £27,000 a year. That could have been a one-year contract for 35,000, and you might have attracted somebody very good. You can afford it with the £10 million. From your point of view, you call rental support burning money. From the Ukrainians' point of view, it's a godsend, it's a lifeline, it helps them into independent living. And for just £1 million, you could be guaranteeing hundreds of Ukrainian families independent living for the next year, or for the next 2 years, in fact, for the next 3 years, would be easily affordable within the money that's been allocated. So I do not see why you cannot accept that some support for rent ought to be offered alongside the idea of buying houses.
Because in my assessment, the issue we face is one of sustainability. Now, we've got this revised government guidance. We're looking at that and seeing what it says we have got to do. But my view is that we need to get people into accommodation. That means that they are able to sustain that in the same place without relying on someone else being able to pay top-ups, because those top-ups will run out, and then you will have a problem that is not simply a problem to solve, it's a problem involving bad credit references, involving needing to move to goodness knows where, involving people who are becoming vulnerable, and that is not a position we want to create. It's not a sustainable approach. I appreciate we differ on this, but that's absolutely, my view is that we should be getting people into accommodation that works for them, in essence, permanently, that they can continue to afford on the earnings they've got, whether that be universal credit or private earnings. As you've noted, a number of Ukrainians have already been able to move into private rented accommodation. Some of them will be able to do so self-sustainingly without support. Some will definitely not. And there, we've got to have those proper long-term solutions. Otherwise, all you're going to have is children moving from school to school, people moving from house to house, and problems getting worse.
I would agree we want to avoid that. Just finally,
I thought we'd had the final question. This is the final question.
The final question is that you're saying it's not sustainable to do top-up rentals, but there is £10 million in the kitty and not a single house has been bought. There are many Ukrainian families who want to move and are ready to move now and need that little extra support to enable them to do so. You obviously support the idea of private rentals.
The same point. What's the question, please, David?
The question is, do you not appreciate from the Ukrainians' point of view that some limited support, say a £200 a month, maybe £200 a month rental top-up would be a godsend that helps them into independent living? Can you not see from their point of view, that's how they would see that? They don't see that as unsustainable. And when you've got £10 million to spend, I can't see it being unsustainable for at least 2 years.
I understand the point you're making. Again, I do not agree with it. We have no idea what other demands are going to come along. As I say, government are just changing the criteria. We don't know what the impact of that is going to be. We want this to be permanent solutions. If you start topping up rent, the moment that money stops, that person is in a very bad position. That is not what we want to deliver. Right, if we then move on to the budget. So, as I said, I will save the political knockabout, I hope, for the budget until full council. But Nick will be able to explain and run through the details of the budget.
Thank you very much, Richard. As I've stressed at various presentations of this budget previously, the circumstances under which we've had to set this budget and the NTFS are unprecedented in recent times. Inflation, as we're all painfully aware, whilst now fallen back slightly to 10.5%, was actually higher a few months ago. And these are levels that have not been experienced in this country for almost 40 years. We've seen costs escalate across the piece by anything up to 20% in some of our contracts. We're obviously suffering, like everybody else, from high energy prices, which have spiked across the board. And also, we're still left with some legacy from COVID, casting its shadow over additional demands for some support services, as well as adding continued uncertainty to some areas of activity. We've had to look at a notional overspend totaling something in the region of £45 million, and that's equivalent to 10% of our net budget, which gives you some understanding of the size of it. In spite of all these adverse factors that I've just gone through, we have today put before you a balanced budget, not just for this year, but for the following 2 years after that. And notwithstanding some quite large increases in service budgets, taking our overall spend to just shy of £500 million, 465 million. We benefited from having a sound financial base, having taken those difficult decisions, necessary decisions last year, and in previous years for that matter, and we're advanced with our transformations and organisational changes, which are vitally necessary to improve efficiency of service delivery and secure future savings. We have a comprehensive business plan to guide everything that we do and to ensure coherence of approach. We're not going to be relying on reserves to cover this year or the next two. Indeed, we plan to increase the overall level of reserves held, as well as release some of our existing ones to support additional one-off priorities. Contrast this, I would say, with squandering reserves on one-off financial prestidigitations, just to keep the plates all spinning that little bit longer before they inevitably fall over in the end. I'm afraid that's what quite a lot of other local authorities, including some of our neighbours, are having to do. We're not banking on savings coming from deferring capital expenditure. That was one argument that was put last week, and thereby avoiding the minimum revenue provision, the MRP. That's not what we are banking on. In fact, we're planning next year a healthy capital spend of 199 million, better programming of which should ensure that instead of more than halving our intended spend as the year progresses, as has been, I'm told, the tradition in Wiltshire, we're more likely to see much smaller adjustments in line with circumstances to this 199 million. We certainly haven't been bailed out by government grants. That was another phrase that came out in our discussions over the past week. The cavalry riding to the rescue was how it was described. We have gained some extra social care money, but we've also lost other direct grants. So I'd describe our government settlement as perhaps beta minus or a gamma plus. It's certainly far, far, far from the cavalry riding to the rescue. Now, as an administration, I would say all administrations do not choose to increase fees and charges and council tax lightly. At the end of the day, we're dealing with residents' money, and no administration, no responsible administration, can defy gravity or exist in a state of splendid isolation. So I would say that, look at those fees and charges and the rises that are projected with that in mind. What we sought to do is ensure that only where necessary and where there is good value for money being provided, have we raised charges. There'll be some lines which are not so great, but consider this. For every fee or charge which is not raised, there will be something else which has to take the strain. Maybe that something else will be in an area just as unpalatable, if not even more unpalatable, than the ones that are being considered. So that brings me on to the council tax, that ultimate factor, which provides almost £2 in every 3 that we spend in our net budget. We propose to raise this by 2.99% in general for next year, 23-24, as well as take the 2% adult social care levy. This will equate to an additional £1.57 per week for the average Band D household. For 24-25, we're looking at 2.99% general and 1% on the adult social care levy. Although I should point out that we have some hope that we will be able to improve on these figures. That means come in lower. And for 25-26, we're looking at 1.99%, thus ensuring that the financial strains on residents are reduced. And that averages out over the 3 years to just over 3.5%. That is what I would argue sound financial planning has achieved and will continue to deliver for the residents of this county. And I commend it to the Cabinet today and ask you all to support it. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Nick. Yeah, there's been a huge amount of work that's gone into this. I think we've come up with a really good budget here, based on some really detailed work from officers, some really detailed scrutiny and work from Cabinet as well. I want to thank everyone who's been involved. As I've said, I won't go into too much further detail today. We will have full council where we will normally have our political knockabout, the one day of the year that we do. But do I have any further comments from Cabinet on the budget? At which point, if I come to Colin Gale before we come to the rest of the process, Colin, you had questions that pertain to the budget. Ashley, who you're probably asking them of, isn't here. I'll try to answer if you've got a supplementary, but I may need to get your written reply.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll kick off then first with wearing my Russell chairman hat. The election costs. The response identifies that the clerks were advised of this in November. We didn't receive it. I spoke to a number of other parishes. They didn't receive it. So we didn't get anything in November. The first we heard was January the 9th. The email in January didn't actually ask for comments. It just was more or less telling us of a matter of a fact. And it didn't talk about any consultation or anything. I do not understand really why the election costs has not gone through to the area boards. Without it going, I mean, the area boards is meant to be the link to the parishes and everything else from this area, and it hasn't gone to them at all. And I would have expected that, and I cannot understand really why you're not proposing to do a consultation on it. For small parishes, it's as I identified in our response, it's 14% of our budget. We've already missed this year's opportunity to put it in, and suggesting that we can just plumb it in post-25 just puts us on the back foot even further all the way through. So it's not small fry money, it's a lot. And so I'm not particularly happy with the response, and I will come forward again with it.
Okay, thanks, Colin. If I try and, I think I can answer a couple of elements. I mean, the budget is something that is set by full council. It's not something that area boards would set. So the budget will be decided by full council in February. And that's why something like this would not be going through the area boards. I don't know precisely what dates information was sent out. I'll need to get that checked and get back to you. I don't have that detail to hand, I'm afraid. In terms of the issue of charging, I think you've got a couple of complexities here, which is why whatever we're doing, and the idea of charging parishes for elections is something that many councils now do. There are elections to parish councils as their own sort of statutory independent bodies, and I'm not sure that principle is one that I personally have an issue with. But the complexity you've got is that you don't know until an election happens whether it will be contested or not. And therefore, you've got to make sure that there is an ability for small parishes, because if they had a contested election, and most don't, but every now and then it happens, then that contested election would be a financial strain that would need to be spread over a number of years, which is why this needs almost always to be looking retrospectively rather than in advance, because you simply don't know whether you're going to hit an uncontested election where the cost for a small parish will be relatively low, or a contested election which could then be more challenging when it comes to budgets. I'll find out what the issues around what communication was sent out, and we'll make sure we get the detail of what was sent when to you. Right, if we then move back to...
Can I just do my other one?
Oh, sorry, you've got two. Sorry, Colin, yeah.
I also had one on the demand responsive bus system and how maximising it was going to, for the Rural Mobility Fund, was going to give us a saving over 3 years as identified. The response is very brief and doesn't really give me any detail, and just really says that by expanding the geographical area for the demand responsive transport scheme, there'll be savings. Well, I was party to the submission of that for that bid and that grant, and the defined area was a map that was already expanded. So I can't really I still don't understand how you're going to make a saving by maximising, or what the extent of maximising the geographical area is going to be.
Caroline.
Thank you for your question. I can't give you the detail behind the exact savings as a result of the maximising the area, but it's more the principle that is the primary benefit, because by maximising the area of the demand responsive transport, we can reduce the scheduled bus services, and it is this scheduled bus services that have been so hard impacted by inflation. So it's not just about fuel, because that will obviously affect demand-led transport as well, but also the volume of drivers and the ability to get drivers and the wage increase of drivers. So effectively, demand response transport is simply more efficient use of the limited resources we have got, because it is responding to the requests rather than just laying on services that may well then be empty. So it's about an efficiency, and through the efficiency, you'll achieve the saving.
Thank you. Right, if I try and find my notes and get back on track. Thank you. I'm glad Kieran's organised, because I seem to be confusing papers today. If I then ask comments back from Graham first, from an overview and scrutiny point of view, I think I'll then bring Nick back in on another topic, but Graham, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, this year we had a real opportunity to get our teeth fully into the budget. On the 24th of February at Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, we had a plethora of questions from all of our select committees, and well done to those. It must be said that we concentrated much more on risk and assumptions rather than going down line by line. And at this moment in time, we have no serious concerns at all, and look forward to you delivering on the budget that you have as draft today, and hopefully we'll go through full council in February. Thank you.
Thank you. I gather Pip is not with us to comment from Financial Planning Task Group. Gavin, was there anything you wanted to add from a task group point of view?
Thank you very much, Richard. I think the Financial Planning Task Group gave the budget a thorough examination, and indeed the Cabinet member has made reference to a number of the questions that were asked during those discussions. Having spoken with the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Management, Richard, I think it would be helpful, after we've completed the budget for this year, to just review how the arrangements for this year, and indeed financial scrutiny as a whole, are operating, given that we have changed them. And I think Councillor Wright is sympathetic to that viewpoint, and I hope you and the Cabinet member, although scrutiny is not a matter for Cabinet, I hope you and the Cabinet member might be sympathetic to that review, in that if it were to occur under the banner of Overview and Scrutiny Management, it would make recommendations which would then in turn come to the Cabinet. I'm not asking to bind your hands in advance, of course, because you need to see what those recommendations are. But I think it would be helpful, given we've changed this year the way in which we've done it, to have a look at how we've done it, and indeed how the ongoing scrutiny is applying. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm very keen to make sure that financial scrutiny is improved as far as we can. I think you only need to look at places like Thurrock to see, or Croydon, or Slough, or whoever, to see what happens where it is not being carried out properly. So I'm really keen on that. I do not want to dictate in any way to Overview and Scrutiny how it should be done. That is for Graham and the collective chairs and the Overview and Scrutiny team to work out. Equally, when it comes, I thought the Overview and Scrutiny session was probably the best one I've attended in terms of some of the detail that was coming out, the questions. I think it was good. I think it was achieving what Overview and Scrutiny needs to be doing when looking at the budget, which was great. I'm very happy to see that improve further, but let's discuss it, let's work it out. Timelines are always hideously tight. They're caused by the fact that government don't give us the numbers until too late. And then you've got week publication dates between meetings, which, I mean, fitting everything in can be incredibly difficult. But yeah, very happy to meet up once we're through the process and work on how to do it better next year. Equally, I'm sure Andy would be keen to as well. Before I come then to Ian, sorry, there was one last. point that we wanted to cover
There
off?
is
We need
indeed.
to make a small change. Something's in the wrong column.
We would like to, somebody has spotted this. So a saving included in Appendix 1, Annex 7, that sets out the delivery of £150,000 in 2023-24 for the cessation of support to Visit Wiltshire. To ensure a smooth transition for Visit Wiltshire, this saving will not be delivered until the end of the contract, which is actually in March 2024. And so therefore the saving will not be delivered until the financial year 24-25. In order to ensure the financial impact is managed, and underspend within place services will be set aside in this financial year to fund the later timing of the delivery of the saving. The budget papers will be updated accordingly, I'm promised, to reflect this small change ahead of our council meeting on the 21st. But obviously we apologise for that. If any eagle-eyed observers have spotted it, apologise.
Thank you. Ian, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Richard. As is now the tradition, I think, in these matters, I shall be holding back my praise, lavish praise and enthusiasm for the budget until the 21st of February. Thank you.
Thank you. If I then open it up to any other councillors who have a question they want to raise. John.
Thank you, Chair. And my apologies in advance that I didn't ask this question at the overview and scrutiny meeting. But to be honest with you, I focused on children's stuff for that and hadn't picked up at that stage that the ugly spectre of charging parishes for elections was back on the agenda again this year. My question to this is, I understand all the arguments relating to these are the parish's elections, why shouldn't they pay for what they have? And certainly I do agree with them paying for by-elections and think that any responsible town or parish council will be carrying an earmarked reserve that would fund one, if not two, by-elections within their community over a electoral year. The issue of full elections, and of course we have no idea of the scope of what the charges that would be passed on would be. We've got indicative costs, but there's no actual idea of what they would be, is that these costs, particularly in smaller parishes, can act as a barrier to democracy. Because when you are talking about in smaller parishes, the potential that election costs would be higher than what their normal precept would raise, then there's no incentive in that local community. In fact, there's a disincentive within that local community for people to stick their heads above the parapet and say, hey, let's actually have an election here for once, rather than just see the same old people continuously just get back on, returned unopposed year after year after year. So I just want to try and get an understanding, and again, apologies because I haven't read this section of the budget in detail. I've concentrated in the area with, I know, not all of us, Rich, should carry your zeal for these things. But actually, how much is this predicted to raise the council? What is the financial benefit from it? And you know, do we truly believe that actually is worth the potential impact on democratic process? Because I think most reasonable people would agree that in smaller communities particularly, the spectre of a large cost for elections is one that makes people think, do we really want to do this? And I'm just mindful of, in closing, that situation up until about 8 years ago, wasn't it? When, do you remember, they shifted the date for withdrawal of elections? It used to be you could withdraw from an election about a week before close of nominations. So they'd publish the list and you'd have a look and see who was standing in seats. And then people who'd been nominated for 2 or 3 wards in a town or parish would suddenly withdraw to the point where a town or parish had no contested elections because they'd divvied them all up between themselves. I'd hate to see us go back to, you know, the government changed the law to stop that from happening. I'd hate to go back to a position where we're just encouraging that sort of behaviour again.
Thanks. To try and answer the questions there, the income that we would expect to raise from that is 400,000 for an election. That's an estimate because we don't know how many. 350. I could have sworn it's.
400,000
But yeah, so it's a year 3. It's a 2025 income estimate. It will depend on the extent to which the elections are contested or not. In terms of the points you raise, I think I would personally say I have some sympathy, but not entirely. Firstly, if you look at our larger towns, they are often party political and always have contested elections. I don't see why Wiltshire Council, the collective people of Wiltshire, should be funding that when it's something that's being done for that town council or the city council. I think on the smaller parishes, it's a reasonable point. It's one we struggled with, was what the potential cost would be of an unexpectedly contested election. I think your suggestion that a town council people should put themselves forward and then fudge it so that they all manage to get elected by standing in different wards doesn't sound terribly democratic to me. Let me finish.
Personal explanation, Chair. That's not what I suggested.
Right,
it's what I said used to happen.
John, I'll let you back in a second. But that wouldn't be democratic in my view. And equally, if a village has a tough topic, somewhere where you've got two different points of views and people are putting themselves forward, I think a contested election there is something that is good from a democratic point of view because it helps understand what the view of that settlement is on whatever those issues are. And they do come up from time to time. We sometimes get contested elections in the very small parishes. It's just a case of finding a balance there. We've been through a number of iterations. There's been an awful lot of discussion between Ashley and Perry about how the best way to deliver this, what the best thing would be. And we've come up with what we think is an effective way that doesn't place an onerous burden on small parishes, but does make sure that those independent bodies are paying for the cost of their elections. Sorry, Ian, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to jump in on the point that was being made. I think there was a kind of a suggestion that local parish councils would kind of manipulate matters in order to not have to pay a bill. From my experience, people either stand or don't stand for a parish council because they want to, and they're not going to be dissuaded from standing and hence causing election or not causing election by somebody whispering in their ear, but we don't want a bill for the parish. So I think democracy in this is driven from the bottom, people wanting to be candidates.
And Ashley, who really ought to be resting in bed, Ashley, turn the computer off and get some rest, has just contacted me to say that the indicative costs for a contested election, we think would be about £1.70 per elector. So we're not talking vast amounts of money there per elector for a contested election inside a small parish. We're not. Did you want to come back in?
Oh, yes.
Go on.
2 points, Chair, if I might very quickly. First of all, thank you for twisting my words, but please don't. As you're well aware, I said that was the practice that used to happen. That's a fact. Your colleague sat next to you was nodding as I made the point. And we all know that they changed the law in order to try and prevent that sort of behaviour from happening, which was a good thing. The second thing is the argument I just heard there was this is a cost that is only incurred by some areas, so only those areas should pay for it. It shouldn't be split out across everywhere. No. If we were to use that same argument, would we only charge on the council tax for schools in communities where schools exist? And if you don't have a secondary school, you don't pay towards a secondary school. No. What we do is we say that some of these costs are common across the whole county, and we expect everybody to contribute equally to it. And in the case of elections, what we say at the moment is that the cost of running elections across the county is common. Some places will have more complex elections than others. I remember, thank goodness, I don't think it was the case last time round, but a couple of cycles ago, we had 6 uncontested seats on Wiltshire Council where elections weren't held. Those wards didn't have a cheaper council tax because they didn't have an election. They contributed the same amount as every other ward did towards the cost of those elections around the county. And I think that there are some things you can drive down too low unnecessarily. And for the sake of, did I get that right? £100,000 a year, 400,000 over the cycle. Frankly, I think that we're, you know, if this had been a £1.2 million saving or something, I could understand. £100,000 a year, come on.
Okay, a couple of things there, John. No, we're not saying that some areas should pay disproportionately. In fact, we're saying completely the opposite. What we're saying is that parish councils will be charged according to the cost of running their election. If it is uncontested, it will be lower. If it's contested, it will be higher. It's their election. It's not our election as Wiltshire Council. It's an election being held for that parish council. So I'm afraid the argument you've put forward, I don't think stacks up at all. It's completely the opposite of that. When you look at budget savings, I don't think anyone should be being at all flippant about the degree of strain that local government is under. It is significant. We have worked really hard to come up with a budget that we can balance over 3 years and identify all the savings, rather than sitting there like other councils with millions, tens of millions of savings to find next year and no clue how to do it. But to do that, that means we really have got to be very precise and very tough at times in terms of the funding and the way in which we bring funding in. And the idea of bringing funding in from parish councils to pay for their own elections is one that's been carried out in a large number of councils, not all yet, but more and more every year. And I don't personally have a problem with. Yeah. Do we have any further questions? Sorry, I'm answering because Ashley isn't here. Otherwise, that would have been his to play with. But do we have any further questions from councillors? Excellent. In which case, I look forward to the what do we call it? Sports Day in February. Oh, its discussion is far too edifying a term for the debate that we normally get on about 0.01% of the budget on election on budget day. Right, we then move on. No, we then need to vote on this, don't we? We need to approve it and ask that it be passed on to full council to consider. So, Nick, please don't read everything out there. We'll be here all day.
Right place in the agenda. Could we look at the recommendations in page 24, labelled A to M, and could I propose those to Cabinet, please?
Along with the change.
Along with the minor change to the Visit Wiltshire.
I'm happy to second that. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Right, if we then move on to item 7, the Treasury Management Strategy. Nick, it's your show for most of today. Over to you again.
Indeed, the Treasury Management Strategy for 23-24. In the past, I've avoided making lots of comments on this, but today this formal meeting, I am going to say a little bit more, as there are some important matters which Cabinet should be fully cognizant of. So each year the Council is required to receive and approve a forward-looking Treasury Management Strategy statement, and this statement covers the period from 1st of April this year to 31st March next year. Treasury Management Statement has been prepared, I can confirm, in accordance with the CITFA Code, practice for Treasury Management and Public Services, and sets out the framework for understanding the activities as well as setting out the boundaries in which these activities will be managed and performance reported against. It's often seen as a rather dry area, of even on the finance side, but of course it's through the Treasury Management operations that the Council has adequate cash available to fund its day-to-day activities, as well as to fund the capital programme. As I also said before, we enjoy a relatively strong balance sheet and have surplus cash, which can be invested in low-risk counterparties to ensure security, provide adequate liquidity, and also, particularly important at this time of rising interest rates, to generate an investment income return. The report includes a summary of the Council's capital plans, a number of key performance indicators, minimum revenue provision policy, annual investment strategy, and third-party loans policy. So there's a number of important issues which I'm going to highlight now in this report. And the first of which is the capital financing requirement, which is known as the CFR. This is the Council's underlying need to borrow. Any capital expenditure which has not immediately been paid for through revenue or capital receipts or capital resources of one sort or another will increase this requirement. It does not increase indefinitely, however, as there is a statutory annual revenue charge known as the minimum revenue provision, which I referred to in my last report on the budget, and that reduces the indebtedness in line with the asset life. Due to the increase in the capital programme, it's estimated that the CFR, the Council's financing requirement, will increase to 734.816 million by the end of 23-24. However, this is predicated on the delivery of the capital programme as it's set out. Scale and delivery timing of the programme, as you've previously referred to, is constantly under review to ensure that we set out a realistic and deliverable capital programme. Schemes funded by borrowing, of course, impact on the indicators in this strategy document and also on revenue. In line with the CFR, it's also assumed within the strategy statement that the Council will increase its external borrowing to 501.664 million. However, the decision to borrow and the timing of any borrowing is delegated to the Section 151 officer and influenced by many aspects, including the forecast spend in the capital programme, but also what's going on in the financial markets and other cash flow considerations. So as part of the decision to borrow, a number of options may be considered, including borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board and securing loans under the financial from the financial markets. I'll talk about the under-borrowed position and that phrase. The CFR will not be totally funded by external borrowing. Due to the way the prudent treasury management and the existence of reserves and working capital, it is forecast that the Council will maintain an under-borrowed position. So this position is the difference between the CFR and the estimated external borrowing, and together with PFI liability. So for 23-24, this under-borrowing is forecast to be 178.220 million. And based on current Public Works Loan Board borrowing rates, this was going to save the Council 8.073 million in interest. That's a revenue charge, would be a revenue charge. That alone, of course, is almost equivalent to 3.5%, actually over 3.5% of what the council tax raises. So secondly, there's something called the authorised limit, which is referred to in the paper. This represents a legal limit beyond which external debt is prohibited. And this limit needs to be set by full council. For 2023-24, it's recommended that the authorised limit is set at 775.494 million. That's based on a prudent estimate of the most likely maximum level of external borrowing for both capital expenditure and cash flow purposes, and that's consistent with other budget proposals. It also includes some headroom for the possibility of additional borrowing required, should that be necessary. Obviously, we don't foresee that, but if necessary. The next phrase to explain is third-party loans. So in previous years, third-party loan policy has been reviewed and is set within this strategy, the details of which can be found in Appendix F. While the council does not wish to become a commercial lender, that's not our core business, and I certainly would not be advising that something that we set ourselves up to do. However, it can use its ability to borrow at relatively economic rates to support the delivery of improved outcomes for the residents of Wiltshire. At the same time, this will facilitate the creation of relatively modest income streams to support the council's overall financial resilience. So all third-party loans must demonstrate alignment to the council's core objectives and priorities. The intention of this policy is to maintain a framework within which the council may consider advancing loans to third-party organisations and is cognizant of the impact of changes in accounting regulation currently being discussed. I think it's probably most appropriate here to refer to Stone Circle, because that's the one area which you will all probably be familiar with. And it's estimated that the council will lend an additional 21.298 million to Stone Circle in the coming financial year. And that will bring the total loans to Stone Circle to 45.721 million. The risks that are associated with loans to Stone Circle and any default are mitigated by the value of the assets that Stone Circle own. As a wholly owned council group, companies, the assets that Stone Circle own would transfer to the council in any eventuality of that organisation having to be wound up. The final point I want to draw attention to is the increased counterparty limits. And this year, a change has been proposed to the investment and creditworthiness policies. Lending limits have been clarified for some investment vehicles and increased for others. There's nothing particularly strange about this. These changes have been made to take account of the additional expertise and detailed economic research that is now being undertaken by the Link Group, who are the council's treasury advisors. Maximum amounts invested will now be determined by Link Group's creditworthiness service, meaning that the council can now invest 15 million with some highly rated banks, which previously was only 10 million or 12 million. I think some differentiation could be invested. I think you'd probably agree with me that that barely keeps up with the inflation that we're suffering at the moment. But of course, it does actually reflect the greater analysis of the relative risks, which is now being made by using Link. So, to conclude, you'll be glad to hear, in summary, against this background and the risks within the economic forecast and exposure to volatility, caution remains with the 23-24 Treasury operations. The Corporate Director of Resources and Assistant Chief Executive Section 151 Officer will, through delegation and reporting, monitor interest rates in the financial markets and will adopt a pragmatic and informed approach to changing circumstances. And so in line with statutory guidance and the best practice, Cabinet is asked to recommend to Council the proposals A to I, which are outlined on page 2 of this report.
Thank you. I don't have anything to add to that. Very comprehensive. Does any Cabinet member have any further comments there? No, I mean, it highlights quite how important good Treasury management can be. If I then come to every...
If I would say that lots of councils' financial woes start from flaws in their Treasury management process.
Yeah. And I will be entirely honest, it has motivated me to just run through the very minor bank accounts that I hold and make sure that interest rates are as maximised as possible, having read the report a few days ago. So something I think we could all learn from. Graham, comments from Overview and Scrutiny.
Thank you, Chair. This was looked at briefly at OSMC, but the Financial Planning Task Group met on the 27th of January to consider the Treasury Management Strategy. And the task group discussed higher interest rates, their effect on investments. They also considered capital expenditure and financing and how they have been influenced by reprofiling cabinet schemes. They also looked at the levels of capital expenditure over the coming years and the role of the Capital Programme Board. The task group is confident that the Council's funds are being invested prudently, its cash flow is planned effectively, and that adequate funds are available for the Council's Capital programmes. But thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. If I then come on to Ian. I know how much you like. Oh, sorry, Gavin.
Well, Chairman, thank you very, very much. I hope you would be unsurprised that actually the Financial Planning Task Group did spend some time on this matter, and I do echo Councillor Bottrell's comment that actually this is a serious matter, and I appreciate it's relatively technical, and therefore some colleagues may not find it the most riveting of subjects, but it is very important to the prudent management of this council, and we did spend a reasonable proportion of time examining the issues that are set within the report and probing the underlying assumptions that are being made here, which is our scrutiny task. And I have to say, both the cabinet member, the 151 officer, gave clear and explicit answers to the questions that we have, and as such, we were satisfied, Chairman. And it is a matter where I think, candidly, colleagues, we do need to pay attention to this. Circumstances, as the cabinet member has said, are changing here. And while we've been through a period where interest rates have been relatively low through the Public Works Loans Board, our principal area of lending to this council, and returns similarly have been quite challenging to derive from our own position of lending money out. Those circumstances are changing significantly, and we're all very well aware of the impacts of inflation on capital projects, and indeed the availability of both people power and other resources on capital projects, which in turn have an impact on the scheduling of those capital projects, which are the principal reason, as you know, Chairman, that this council borrows money to fund those capital projects. One area we did ask, and Mr. Brown was very kindly said he would examine this for us, was to differentiate within the capital programme, which has a relationship with Treasury Management, which I hope I've been clear about, as to those elements of the programme which are in essence funded by government grant, and whereby any delays in the programme do not have an implication for our Treasury management going forward, and those which are the subject of loans that this council takes, because as you know, Chairman, such loans for the capital programme do have an impact on our Treasury management and do have a subsequent year impact on the revenue costs that the council has to manage. And therefore, if we're borrowing money early for works that then cannot, for whatever reason, be scheduled to take place in that given financial year, there is an implication, a negative implication for us as a council. And therefore, that is an area, I think, where as a scrutiny team, we've just asked for a piece of work to be done, which will enable us to be clearer about those. We should always be concerned about delays, of course, in the programme, but there is a greater issue of delays where that element of funding is coming from our own borrowings and therefore the cost to us, as against delays in those areas where government grants are involved, and therefore there isn't a cost to this particular council, although obviously to the wider public purse there is. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Richard. As a connoisseur of Treasury management, I can only congratulate Councillor Bottrell on his tour de force in terms of the presentation, the detail, and I look forward to more of this at the council meeting on the 21st. I can't wait to get there. I think it's going to be very exciting indeed. Can I just ask a couple of questions in relation to the current portfolio position, which is at number 30, and that relates to Treasury investments and the movement away, perhaps not unappropriately, from property into building societies and banks. And my question is whether this is on the basis of the advice that we receive from our external advisors, or whether this is on the basis of our own internal fund management. And my second question, which you may well have touched on in your long but very, very interesting presentation, is in relation to the market loans within the Treasury borrowing section of the same table, just to help me understand what the nature of the market loans are as opposed to the PWLB loans. Thank you very much.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. The majority of money is held by banks, the investments, and property fund is 10 million pounds currently. So I don't quite know. I mean,
Sorry, let me clarify. That was my mistake.
help,
So
please. Yeah.
I shouldn't have referred to the property funds. I was referring to the money market funds, which have dropped in relative terms. So I just wanted to get a sense of, in terms of how we're managing the Treasury investments. I'm just wanting to understand partly what the strategy is behind it, but more so whose advice we're taking in relation to those particular investment decisions.
Well, I mean, the broad argument is that as interest rates rise, the banks have suddenly become more competitive, and therefore there's less reliance on short-term instruments and money market funds. That would be my summary of the situation. But you know, if the Section 1501 officer may want to comment in slightly more detail.
Yep, that's spot on. As interest rates have risen, the banks that we can put our money with have become more competitive, and so there's been a move away from money market funds, which have a low return, to banks and building societies that are offering greater returns.
That's very helpful. My question was whether that was a decision taken internally, or whether these are decisions taken. I think I know the answer, but whether they're decisions taken externally.
So those decisions are all internal. We take the advice from our Treasury advisors, who provide the framework around who we can put our money with. But in terms of the actual daily decision of putting our funds, that is an internal decision.
Thank you. And my second question relates to the market loans within the Treasury borrowing. I'm just interested to understand. I'm sure it appears in great detail further down the paper, but what the nature of the market loans are. Thank you.
I think from time to time, there are reasons why you might want to take out a loan with some other organisation, the Public Works Loan Board. The interest rates, I seem to remember, interest rates tend to lag coming down on the Public Works Loan Board, and you can sometimes secure more competitive borrowing as a result. I mean, it's stable, so it's obviously some fixed term facility, and I do remember somewhere you were right that there is another reference to it. We hear the answer from the Section 151 officer.
Yeah, so in terms of that portfolio, we break it down. The majority, as you can see, is held with the PWLB. So market loans are other banks. They are historically, they've been there for some time. I wasn't going to mention it, but LOBOs are included within that portfolio. So lender option, borrower option. You may have heard of those. If not, that's probably for another time. So Barclays are included within that market loans. It's those types of financial institutions.
Yeah. You've tempted me now, Section 151. Just remind me what a LOBO is, or what just tell us how that works, but without taking up too much of this committee's time.
Let's stick to the financial version, not the one from World War Z, please.
So historically, there was when we were getting debt from either the PWB or financial institutions that were offering these options. So lender option, borrower option. Effectively, the council would take an interest rate over a fixed point in time, and then at various calls, if the interest rate has gone up, then the lender has an option to increase the rate, and then the borrower has an option to either repay it in full or accept the new rate. That's a LOBO.
Who said Treasury management was dry? Thank you very much.
Pretty much everyone here, sorry. Okay, do I have any other members who wish to ask a question on this topic? No, in which case we've had the proposals moved. I will second them. All those in favour? Thank you. And then you don't get to escape yet, I'm afraid, Nick. We now come on to financial year 2022-23 Quarter 3 revenue budget monitoring.
If I can just get my mouse to move to the right. Q3, right, okay. So this is obviously the third opportunity to look at how the year 2022-23 is panning out. And compared to Q2, which I presented in November, this is obviously a much more informed picture as to what's happened in the year, or what's happening in the year, and the last opportunity to do that before the final year end is achieved. So essentially the overspend, which of course is underlying and rolls forward, is broadly static, actually but slightly increased, sorry, to 15.697 million, equivalent to 3.5% of the net budget. So when I say broadly static, 3 to 3.5, up to 3.5%. And of course, after management actions, of course, they're one-offs, it's actually reduced to 5.037 million. Slightly more than is forecast in Q2, but actually below the level that was forecast in Q1. And that equates to just over 1% of our net budget. And to repeat what I said in Q2, at forecast overspend will, of course, be covered by the inflation reserve, which leaves 3.8 million remaining in the inflation reserve prior to the transfer, which are shown as Proposal C. I think it's fair to draw some attention to particular areas this time round, and families and children's services are showing a couple of £1 million worth of additional adverse change, and that's the results of some additional net demand, although the number of children in care is still within the target range that was set. It also includes some staffing issues and use of agency staff, unavoidable use of agency staff. Whilst there's been this forecast increase in the overspend, the net results in other areas of expenditure are overall more much the same as they were previously. And as was marked at the last of our meetings last week, mainly due to the capital, the changes which are favourable in capital financing, with more interest being obtained and less borrowing, the corporate area is showing a healthy, positive change. And I guess that's a demonstration that our Section 151 officer is practicing what he preaches. I always get asked about the delivery of savings. Now almost 93% are forecast to be achieved this year, and that's up from 87% at Q2 stage. I would say this is very good, in comparison to previous years. This is very good, and it means that as we enter 23-24, we're not going to be the legacy of this current year is not going to knock us out of kilter. So some very good news there in terms of the savings achieved, or forecast to be achieved, I should say. So I think Cabinet should be reassured that despite what has been an horrendous year for inflation, pay awards which were considerably in excess of anything that was forecast when this year's budget was set and agreed, contract price rises, all these things going up, that the overall financial position of the council for this year remains under control and basically sound. And that's the message that I think I want to leave with you today. Under control and basically sound. And I ask Cabinet to endorse this report.
Thank you, Nick. Do we have any questions from Cabinet members on this? clearly it's something that we look at on a regular basis and have discussed in detail. If I then come to Graham.
Thank you very much. Yes, this was dealt with briefly, but was left really to the Financial Planning Task Group to do their scrutiny on the 27th of January and November. The task group recognised that there remain pressures on the budget in some areas. It continues to be an improving position overall. The current revenue budget is forecast to overspend by just 5 million by the end of the financial year. Therefore, the task group considered ongoing pressures on the current budget in terms of staff, pay and potential increases in demand. No significant concerns were raised, but the task group will continue to monitor the progress of the revenue budget. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Gavin?
Chairman, you've just heard the report of the task group. I think there was a degree of diary, confusion is the wrong word, but diary time allocation, which I'm not sure we quite got the right way around on this particular occasion of Q3 coming to overview and scrutiny management and then coming to the task group, which is possibly, as I mentioned earlier when we discussed around the budget, an area we might want to look at in terms of scheduling and relative responsibilities. If you'll indulge me, there just is one area that I would like to ask about, so forgive me, as I don't believe it was raised when we met on Friday, and that's around the designated schools grant, which it highlights in paragraph 100 on page 238 of our papers, and then goes to one area, paragraphs 101, and importantly 102 and 103. And I think it might be helpful, Chairman. This is an area where the deficit is obviously very substantial and has risen significantly. It isn't, and we all, I think, earnestly hope it won't become a duty or responsibility of this council to deal with it. But nevertheless, there are references to the engagement of the council in this matter, and in particular in paragraph 102, the Delivering Better Value programme and the small expenditure of money related to that. Excuse me. I wonder if it would be helpful just to understand a little more about what that piece of work is and the implications for the council, if any. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. I think the first thing to note is government has kicked this can a further 3 years down the road, so it is not an imminent issue that we're facing. But if I can ask Lucy to respond there, please.
Yeah, so as I said at Overview and Scrutiny, we've got the Delivering Better Value programme with the DFE, which we are anticipating potentially about £1 million to come through that route. But in addition to that, we've also invested some of our transformation funds with the council, and working across both of those, the intention is really to get in early and to work with schools at a much earlier point to prevent the need for that kind of statutory intervention and leading on to EHCP. So that is all being worked up at the moment. More than happy to share the detail of that in due course. I don't know if Helene wants to say anything else.
Well, just to say that, well, you know, one of 75% of LA is in this position. We're embracing the support through this programme, and Children's Select taking a real interest in this and reporting back regularly in terms of the progress we're making with the DBV to Children's Select.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. And thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. If I then come on to Ian.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Just 2 points, I think, in terms of this particular paper, as to whether, as Nick Botterill quite rightly says, that each quarter we get closer to a clearer view in terms of what the outturn will be at the end of the fourth quarter. And I'm just wondering if there's any sense, given that we're talking at this stage of a £5 million overspend, and I understand the context around that, whether we have any sense of whether that will be reduced or whether that will extend a little bit further within the context of the final outturn. And my second question is in terms of the proposals, and indeed proposal D, which is £500,000 for road sign infrastructure. I just welcome a little bit more information on what that would mean. Thank you.
Shall I comment first on the the likely overspend for the year. Look, I'm presenting a report that forecasts the overspend of £5 million. So I think that's the best I can give you at this moment in time as to how the year will pan out. You know, I wouldn't be proposing the paper if I didn't think that was the best. You know, I'd sent it back for more officer work if we suspected that that wasn't the case. Yeah, of course, if we subsequently come in under £5 million, then no one will be happier than me, and I'm sure you'll also be happy as well. But you know, 5 million is what we're proposing at the moment. In terms of D, I don't know if the Cabinet Member or Richard, do you want to talk about that? We have discussed it, but
if I provide some context, and then perhaps Caroline would like to come in. I mean, the elements under item C on the para C on the proposals are, or at least B to E. No, yes, B to E are dependent clearly on the budget. If we were to see amendments put forward to the budget that did something with the reserves, then that would change. So this isn't guaranteed to happen. It's requiring us to get through February without change there. So what we're looking at is how to allocate that money that we now believe that we are not going to need to retain as reserve in a way that is dealing with prevention and is working to address some of those long-term issues that we're facing. One of the issues that we're facing is around, it's quite a small issue, but quite a noticeable one, and one certainly that is commented on, is about the state of repair of some of our road signs. I think there are a number of cases where you'll find a road sign that instead of being nice and level is slightly lopsided, where one of the supports is perhaps a little damaged or rusting or sinking. These are they're part of our network. They're part of the way that the county looks. So we wanted to look at a way of speeding up the repair of some of those signs, which there's one certainly on the route that I occasionally end up going through Westbury on my way to County Hall. Given the traffic there, I really try and avoid it. And if you do, you'll notice that there's a sign there that's been damaged between Westbury and Trowbridge, been damaged for as long as I can remember now without being repaired. Caroline, was there anything further to add?
Only that I have asked officers if they would be able to give me a bit of a layout in terms of how the money's been spent so far and ongoing plans for its use.
Thanks. And the aim would be over the course of the next year or so to get those signs that we know need resolving, need repairing, repaired. Okay. Do I have any other members who wish to ask a question here? John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just a question. Nick, the Cabinet Member, you made the point that our children in care numbers are low at the moment, which they are. And if I may say, I think this is a testament to the success of our early help projects that we've been running. And through you, Chair, I think congratulations to all the team involved in that. But if there was something that perhaps would keep me awake at night if I was prone to such things, it would be that our children in care numbers are low, particularly when compared with comparator councils and other councils out there. If they were to rise to the levels that there are in other councils, the funding that we have put aside in the latent reserve, are we still confident there is adequate funding there to be able to meet the pressure that such a rise would demand?
I don't know who wants to respond first there.
Well, I would say that rather than low, I'd say they remain within the target range that's been set, and that's the expectation that they remain in that level, although they're obviously quite close to the upper limit of the target range. I mean, lots of things keep me awake. That probably is one of them. Yes, of course, we could experience some change in that, but all the plans and all the abilities of that department are focused on making sure that doesn't happen. And I think, you know, these things can occur suddenly, but they're more likely to occur because things go wrong over a long period of time, not yes, you can have a spike just because of one or two cases, but a consolidated spike of lots and lots and lots of cases, I would think is fairly unlikely. And other local authorities, well, I think you need to, go to them and ask them what they're doing, quite frankly. We're confident that what we're doing is the best approach. And other local authorities presumably have to justify their approaches. And I'm sure the Cabinet member wants to probably add some more specific detail on that.
Yeah, John, I think the main issue for us actually is the cost of placements. I'm less concerned about, I feel confident of our current programs, our early intervention and all the work that we've been doing for so long and is bearing fruit. I think really it's the cost of placements, which is much more worrying. And our continued drive obviously is to ensure that as many of our Wiltshire children remain with Wiltshire foster families is essential. But the paper later in the agenda today on the residential block payments is exactly why we are looking ahead to ensure that we don't get stung on these extraordinarily high placement budgets. And it's just something we have to keep working on and monitoring.
I'm going to add one more thing and then you can come back. This concept of investing in prevention, of understanding what the long-term strategic needs we face are, and then making sure that we are putting resource in, not just to deal with today's problem, but to deal with the problem and reduce that problem over time, control it, make sure that we are getting better outcomes for the people involved, and that we're also in that process controlling our own costs, is the fundamental ethos of this administration. So there will be no letting up in the work we're doing in prevention. I really want to be clear on that.
Sorry, can I just come back quickly that Jen Salter, who is our interim head of safeguarding, is actually leading a strategic group based focused on placements to ensure we get this area right.
John.
Thank you. And I know I'm a broken record on this topic, and I do recognise that. This isn't a budget season question. I'm asking this question on a regular basis, and I'm desperately trying to get my phone to work properly to show me this week's data, and I can't get it to. But the reality is as we all know, at the moment, our children in care numbers, and this is something really which we should celebrate, but our children in care numbers are significantly below most other councils. And one of the things we should be doing isn't just saying, well, we've got it right, they've all got it wrong. We always need to be looking at, because the fear there always is, of course, is you're missing people who you should have in. I'm confident we're not at the moment. We've explored this over much time, and I'm happy. And I think that the early help is achieving what it should be aiming. My question, though, and it wasn't meant as a criticism of work that the council is doing, but it's a genuine scrutiny question of the latent reserve that we put aside to deal with what the increased demand that we anticipated would happen, partly because our numbers were at the level they were at. Are we still confident that that latent reserve is at an adequate level to be able to manage any increase should our numbers become more in line with other local authorities?
Okay, I think there are a couple of issues here. The latent demand reserve is there to deal with demand issues coming out primarily of the effects of COVID, lockdowns, and particularly those impacts on children are the ones that worry me most, although some of the issue about people who are institutionalized almost in their own homes, older people who are scared and finding it very difficult to sort of re-engage with life the way they're used to is also an issue. It all fundamentally comes down to development of mental health issues there. But that is distinct from the reserves we're talking about in this paper, and I think that's worth noting. I don't know if Nick wants to comment further, but we've discussed this in detail with officers, and everything that we are hearing is that yes, we are in a good position, that there is no requirement for further resource to be made available because we are doing that prevention work.
I have nothing. That's precisely the answer I would give. I have nothing to add to that.
The other point, John, is of course we've got the external validation from the Oxford Brookes University who are looking at our numbers, and so that report will come out soon and will come to scrutiny. So I know you're asking sort of two questions. One is, are the funds available, but also I'm answering on, you know, the work we continue to do seems to be working, and we want to carry on with it.
And Lucy and her team have asked for a drawing down 2.8 million from the latent demand reserve to address issues around children's services, but around children's services coming out of the impacts of COVID. So that work is ongoing, which again gives me a reassurance that the right degree of scrutiny is being given and the right degree of resource is being put into meeting the demand that we've identified.
Don't get me wrong, Chair, our early help work is exceptional. I do believe it is, and I was very pleased that this year's budget protected much of that work. But it's
all of that work.
it's always our job as your critical friend to be asking the questions that sometimes people don't want asked.
Okay, thank you. Were there any further questions on this item? In which case, Nick, I need to ask you to move the proposal, sorry.
Indeed.
Again, don't worry reading it.
Indeed. Well, I enjoy reading. Page 217, ask Cabinet to approve the proposals A to C, and also to note the proposal on page 218, A to B.
Thank you. I seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 9. Yeah, we'll do item 9 and then take a short break. Financial year 22-23, quarter 3 capital budget monitoring. Your last part of your drive, Nick.
Is the alcohol on sale? Okay. Capital. So the people who watch this will be have no surprise that the capital programme is now reduced again in this Q3 estimate to 172.227 million, down from 191.9 that was forecast at Q2, and something in the region of 300 million that was started out. So remember how, however, that it was sorry, I'll start again. Remember, however, that this was predicated, and indeed I'll go further to say that we are most likely looking at not at spending £84 million in the remaining final quarter, but the actual spend for 22-23 will be something in the region of 120 to 130 million pounds. So I fully understand that I'm proposing 172 million here, but we're looking at a likely spend of 130. So that would imply that the remaining spend will be no more than 40 million for the remainder of the year. And of course, we have debated at length in the various forums the reasons for this. I heard it said somewhere that it's like a 1950s American TV serial, The Incredible Shrinking Budget. But it's not really a strange phenomenon. It's not unique. In fact, I'd say it's pretty typical of local authorities and including and actually all organisations that plan large-scale capital expenditure. And actually, sometimes, as we heard the other day, prudence does have a hand in inflating the barrage balloon of future commitments to include every kitchen sink. It's actually prudent to assume and to plan for these forward. So it's not just about having a number that continually shrinks with the experience of when the experiences of the year become apparent. So I've said before, and I'll say it again, I do think we are actually now moving to a better place. And you will notice that next year's capital budget starts from the more realistic premise of around 2/3 of this year's at the outset. And that does reflect the greater traction that all the departments are getting on this type of expenditure, the improvement in the reporting, financial reporting that is coming through. And so, you know, we're starting next year at a more realistic level. Yes, it will be reduced, I'm sure, as the year goes on to some extent, but actually I don't expect to see a repeat of 22-23, well, certainly not the scale of that that we've had in 22-23. So this is the final sort of projection before year end, 172 million. I am saying that it's probably going to be 130 million or 100, somewhere thereabouts, probably a bit less.
Thank you, Nick. I think given the, I would say, significant improvements we've had in the whole of the budget process and the budget monitoring process, the capital budget's the last part we're working on. We're starting to see that improvement there as well, which is great. We need to have that honest assessment of what the position is based on the reality of delivery. And I'm really pleased that we're moving in that direction. It's that last part of that ability to plan over a long-term period and give us the stability we need as an authority to actually focus on delivering and not chasing whatever the ghost of the day is. Any other cabinet members with comments? No, thank you. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Financial Planning Task Group looked at this on the 27th of January. The task group again noted the reprogramming of capital spend into subsequent financial years, and the task group considered the actual capital spend at the end of the financial year, the minimum revenue position, the focus on capital programme board upon projects funded by council borrowing, the retention payments for capital projects. Again, no significant concerns were raised, and the task group would like to thank the cabinet members and officers for continuing to work on improving our capital budget monitoring. And I would just like to extend my personal thanks to the Financial Planning Task Group, who've had a busy month. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Wright. And forgive me, Chairman, I was remiss in not saying I'm Councillor Gavin Grant, the member for Malmesbury and the Vice Chair of the Financial Planning Task Group. I think we do note and welcome the changes that have been made here, the greater transparency and focus on this area, and the work both of the Cabinet member, Mr Brown, and Ms Watkin and the team in giving greater clarity here. That said, the task group, I think, is perhaps slightly more critical than that report might suggest, Chairman. And indeed, it's a comment from the Cabinet member that underlines the point that even here, as we come to Q3, with a figure of 170 million in the capital budget, unlike the position on the revenue budget, where I think we have a fairly clear expectation of where the outturn will finish and broadly aligned with the Q3 report that has just been adopted. Here we have a very strong confidence that the 170 million will be nothing like the level of spend that the council actually has in its capital budget, and the variance, Chairman, is going to be of the order of between 20 and 30%. Which, if I take us back to the revenue budget, if we were sat here saying, well, we're not quite sure what the outturn would be at the end of the year on our revenue budget, and it could be a variance of 20 or 30%, I think there might have been a rather greater debate in this council chamber than there was on the Q3 position there. So this is an area that needs further work, Chairman. And again, when we looked at the capital budget in the budgetary examination for the next fiscal year, again, there were some probing questions asked as to will we actually see that quantum significant step up on capital next year, or will we find ourselves in a rather similar position as we go through the year of those numbers coming back down? And the reason why this matters, I think, Chair, is twofold. Firstly, clearly there are internal resource implications here of staff time, energy and effort, and discussions with contractors in trying to bring these capital programmes to reality. And I refer back to the comment I made on the Treasury management area. There are also actual real-time and real cash implications for the council, in that if we're borrowing money for capital programmes that aren't going to happen in a given year, yes, they will flow through to the next and we will accrue accordingly for them, but we've incurred a cost for that money in the given financial year. So we welcome the significant efforts that are being made to get this area under greater degree of rigour and accuracy. We appreciate that there will be factors, and there's certainly plenty of them at the moment, that cause slippage in capital programmes that are not of our making or doing, or do not reflect in any way on the performance of our team. But I think from the Financial Planning Task Group's point of view, we probably share with you and the Cabinet member and our illustrious finance team a desire that actually we get a greater or a narrower gap in terms of the annual budget on capital, and as we head towards the end of the financial year, the expected outcome. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Nick, you wanted to come back in?
Well, I'd just like to pick up on a couple of those points. First of all, you alluded to the comparison with the revenue side, and you know, we obviously have a best guess there, and most accurate that we can come up with. Whereas here, we're presenting something, but I am outlining where I think it's going to end, and not saying that it will end at 172 million. And of course, the difference is that it will come down. So therefore, it is not in the same nature of a deficit that could spiral upwards. This is spending that likely will not happen. And the second point, and we did touch on this, and I did make this reference to that sometimes it's the prudence that dictates that you need to include lots of things in the capital budget, even though they're theoretical and not likely perhaps to be timed within the period you're looking at. And in particular, those external, capital works funded by external resources and government grants or whatever. They do seem to play a big part in the overstatement of the capital programme. And you made the point about the slippage has revenue implications. Well, of course, it has less revenue implications, as we discussed, because those external resourced amounts are not subject to minimum capital provision, minimum revenue provision. So therefore, they have less direct impact on our revenue position. And certainly, I don't think that what we're proposing for next year, in terms of the capital programme, there's any assumption within that somehow we'll forego minimum revenue position because we won't spend the capital, and therefore that will, flatter our position as we go forward. I don't think that's that is not part of the mentality and the intentions behind what we're doing. So I think you raise those points. They are valid points, but I think both of them are not, they're not concerns that I think should worry Cabinet or the wider Council to any great degree.
Thanks. And I just think on this broader point of trying to sort of nail down the future of the capital programme, I think we have to be cognizant of a couple of things. There are schemes that, because they are economic regeneration schemes, are notoriously difficult to pin down. So the Maltings has sat in our capital programme probably since, well, not quite Wiltshire was created, but close to. Yet there have been a constant flow of issues there, primarily driven by economic factors outside of the Council's control that have meant that's constantly slipped. So we've got to be careful to think we can ever be absolutely precise on a capital programme. You're then dealing with contractors as well, which brings its own issues, as anyone who's ever done anything to their house will have encountered, only on a larger scale here. So we need to, I think we've got to be careful from expecting absolute precision and understand that we would hope that the future year will be good, and then the further out you get, the more it becomes an estimate dependent on a lot of circumstances, planning perhaps not the least. You wanted to come back in?
I did, Chairman, because I hoped I'd been clear about the difference between those schemes funded by government grant and those funded by our own borrowings, and I completely take that point. But I'm gently, slightly more alarmed now, having heard the Cabinet member's response than I was before that was said, because a reality of a situation whereby we have at the beginning of the year an expectation of spending £200 million and a close year position, albeit I completely appreciate what Councillor Bottle said, and I'm not going to hold him to it, but an expectation of a spend of around 130 or 140 million. That is, by definition, a slippage of 60 to 70 million pounds. And some of those monies are monies that have been borrowed by this council, and costs have been incurred as a result. That is just a simple statement of fact. And I think as a scrutiny group, I don't think we're at cross purposes with you here at all, that there is a desire to make sure that we accept completely. Of course, it would be entirely unfair to be saying to Cabinet and to officers, well, you're £8 million out here on a capital programme of 160 million. That's an absolute disgrace. Nobody is suggesting that. But a gap of this order is, I know, to you and to us, and I know to our finance team and our 151 officer, a matter of some degree of concern. I put it no stronger than that. And the aspiration is that that gap between the budget and the reality of our capital programme should close down significantly. We all share that view, I hope. And I think there's a question which did emerge in our scrutiny as to the capacity of the board examining these capital programmes to deal with the longer term, i.e. the annual, as against the immediate, i.e. the quarter. And that was acknowledged as a real question. And I hope at some future point, and I don't ask it to be today, Chair, that we examine how well, and not in any critical sense of a belief that it isn't doing well, how well the new structure of control on our capital spend is doing, and what further action could be taken to close that gap down. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks. Fair points, and things that we are constantly dealing with from a cabinet perspective, particularly from Nick's side. Right, Ian.
Thank you, Richard. Well, sincerely, I hope I have prudence on my budget bingo card, because I'm feeling going to feel rather lucky if that's the case as we proceed to the event on the 21st of February.
And you've got the wrong day for budget bingo. That is the 21st of February. But I would love to have a formal budget bingo card if we can put one out.
Well, I'll be circulating them to all members. And as I say, prudence is going to be a lucky one. I can think of other phrases that may apply equally. Bluntly, I don't think I've got an awful lot to add. We've gone over this subject meeting after meeting, week after week, month after month. I'm thoroughly looking forward to the performance over the 23-24 year, and just to observe how much closer we get and deliver on the target that the budget sets, that we'll be confirming or not on the 21st of February. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe legally, one way or another, we've got to confirm a budget on the 21st of February. But yeah. Any further questions? No, in which case, if you could move the proposals.
Right, well, I'd ask Cabinet to note the proposals on page 249 and 250, labelled A to F, and I propose that you do that.
Thank you. Again, I'll second it. All those in favour? Marvellous, thank you. We will now take a 5-minute break and reconvene here at 12:10. Please don't be late. We will be cracking on. Right then, everyone, please sit down. We're going to be cracking on. Nick. Cabinet, please, can we simmer down and we will now crack on. Okay, we then come on to the next agenda item, which is Corporate Performance and Risk Monitoring Report Q3, one for me to present. Just by way of an update, there has been a lot of discussion going on behind the scenes. Now we've had a chance to have this running for a few cabinet meetings to look at areas that we feel should be added, issues that we think perhaps should be removed. I won't prompt you. There have been a couple of changes already. There will be some more changes coming in terms of the metrics that we are looking at. We're trying to sharpen them up and make them as relevant as possible, both for Cabinet as a whole to be looking at, for scrutiny to be looking at when the report comes to them, and for us to look at here today. So I would expect we will see several additional metrics coming in at the next presentation of this meeting. The obvious ones that are missing at the moment are around highways, and there will be more coming there. For example, there's been significant discussion going on. I wasn't actually planning on spending any more time discussing the detail of the report. It's there. I'm assuming you've all read it. I don't think there are any particular highlights that I wanted to draw that we haven't covered off at the last iteration. So at that point, I will open it up to any questions from Cabinet. Laura.
Not a question, just to echo what you said. We had some good debates within our department about which are the things that we should include in this. And I suppose in children's services, as John will know, it's quite extraordinary because we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ways of measuring our performance. But I feel happier with the ones that we're going to add as a better reflection of how we judge children's services.
I think that's the case in all departments. We were always expecting this to change, and that's part of the rigor of the process. Once it's been running for a full year, I think we'll be at a stable point, and we'll have data that will continue more consistently over time. Then, if I turn to no other questions, Graham, did you have any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we did consider this at the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee meeting, and some of the select committees will be reviewing further through their own arrangements for looking at more detailed performance scrutiny, but we don't have any direct comments from OSMC. Thank you.
No, thanks. But I think it will be really important over time to make sure that scrutiny is using the data that is relevant to each of the committees in the relevant in its own meetings.
I absolutely agree. Thank you.
So if I then come to Ian.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I think this document's getting better and better. So I credit to those that have been involved in the workshops and so forth. And certainly from our position and my position, the better this document can be, of course, the better that we can judge the outcomes and delivery of the business plan as well as the overall performance of the council. So it is very, very important to all of us. And I've just got a couple of comments, really. One is it's a very small point in relation to a percentage of children who are physically active, percentage of adults who are physically active, and we have a target and a figure. But I'm just wondering, and maybe it's a naive question, how we judge who is active and who isn't. I know we've all just got up for 5 minutes. Maybe that counts towards it. But I'm just wondering how we make that judgment. My second, hopefully slightly more substantive point is I think potentially it's such a good document now. And there's a reference in it to the fact that it's much easier to report on an annualized basis because you avoid some of the bumps and the troughs and so forth that can be in some ways misleading in terms of progress or otherwise. Whether this, and it may be the intention anyway, to bring this to full council once a year so that full council can discuss it, look at the successes and look at the remediations in terms of areas that need improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly from a cabinet perspective, it's something that we are using and will continue to use more frequently than annually. My view is that from a cabinet perspective, we really ought to be bringing it, sticking to it on a quarterly basis, maybe a 4-monthly basis. We need to work out exactly what cycle we settle into in terms of the use of the data. But I do take the point where we're dealing with annual metrics, but they aren't all, and many of the metrics that are coming along will be rolling annual metrics. So they are giving a good indication of movement over time. The issue about children who are adults who are physically active, it's a good one. It's a question that we asked, certainly I asked about how on earth, how do we know that? It's based on survey data from Sport England. It is national data, so it is giving a good sort of national comparator. It isn't perfect, it isn't ideal. I do think something about, and without rerunning all of the debates, I do think something in there around understanding people's ability to get out into the countryside, walk, engage, enjoy themselves. I don't know how you measure it. And it was a challenge to officers, is there a way of measuring it from a public health perspective? But I kind of like the idea of having that sort of metric in there as well. So it's not just about the physical well-being, but potentially physical and mental well-being in that process.
Yes, thank you. And my other question was about whether we can bring, given that I think it's full council that approves the business plan, and given that this is an inherent part of the delivery of the business plan, whether this could, and maybe it was your intention anyway, to bring this on an annualised basis, perhaps, to full council for their consideration and discussion.
Sorry, I was clearly racking my brain for the fact it was a Sport England survey. I don't see a problem with that. I'm not sure it should necessarily be tacked onto a budget meeting because that tends to go on and on. But yes, I think from a full council perspective, yeah, I think it would be useful. I think the more that we are all having a chance to just sort of sense check data, the better. I also think to some extent we need to tie it in with the better use of data through area boards and the better use of an understanding of some of the more granular detail as well. But that's something we're working on separately. Yeah, that's a watch this space. Thank you. Do we have any other members? Gavin.
Thank you very much, Richard. In fact, that was a very helpful segue into my first question. I have two, by the way, please. But I just thought I would share with you in the break the very helpful observation from Mr. Brown as our 151 officer that legally the budget has to be set by the 11th of March. So there is considerable scope for a very thorough debate over many, many days at our next at our budget meeting. There's something to look forward to. I wonder, you just observed it, Richard. If I could take you to just to point 33 and just ask, I'm sure there is no Big Brother implication here, even if the succinctness of the point has that kind of slight implication. As to the data, I speak as an area board chair, as to the data that you're looking to examine from area boards, that would be helpful to understand that, particularly in its relationship to the business plan. And forgive me if I've missed it. I think and it may be that I have, but I think it would be useful perhaps at an area board chairs gathering, just to run through this with area board chairs so we perhaps have a better understanding of the areas we should be, from the perspective of this particular report, focus on. I have a separate question, Richard, but if we could just deal with it. I appreciate Ashley's not here, and as the Vice Chair of his Electoral Review Committee, I wish him very well, as we've got a whole load of community governance reviews in some very interesting parts of rural Wiltshire coming up, and I'm hoping I'm not going to be asked to chair them, so I wish him a very full and speedy recovery from COVID. But if that could be clarified, Chairman, that would be helpful, and then I'll come, if I may, I'll come with my second question.
Yes, thanks. This is actually something I, as you may have picked up, I rather like data, and I like nothing more than asking for information from officers and then going away and studying it. I think when we're looking at area boards, we've got some very granular data around the lower super output areas. Now, you'll note from the business plan, one of the things that I think is absolutely critical is tackling inequality and tackling areas of deprivation. We've got the pilot community project works going on. We're looking at releasing a further 2 million into that community development work from reserves in this budget. And it was very interesting looking at area board spend and how that correlated to LOSAs that are high areas of deprivation. In many cases, area boards were not necessarily tying funding in, and I've only got historic data, it's being refreshed, and I gather it has improved over time. But area boards were really not focusing in the way that perhaps I felt when I looked at the spend of my own area board, and it's quite hard in a rural one where you don't have the same deprivation indices sitting there, but I don't think we were focusing in the way we thought we were by the use of data that we didn't have, but we could make available to really focus in on those areas where we've got groups that are not getting support. We've got communities that are suffering, even whether it be in smaller pockets or larger pockets, from deprivation, and providing that evidence to area boards and challenging area boards to say, right, so how do we shape our delivery so we're not just taking grants from whoever comes forward, but saying, and if I give a specific example, not in my division, but there's a play area in Redlinch on one of our HRA council estates, where the play equipment has slowly degraded over time, not been replaced. There haven't been, this goes back to the district council days, probably 30 years. And was out there with my wife. There was a discussion she'd had with a child who was pointing to graffiti on one of the bits of defunct play equipment that her mother had put there. And that little pocket, it just doesn't feature, yet it's something that when you look at it, that LOSA wasn't getting area board funding because the people in there aren't putting forward the grants and there aren't the organisations. Now, that may sound simplistic, but if, for example, Melksham North, which is an area of deprivation, it's what, 15 minutes walk away from the centre? Are we really wanting people where we're targeting resource to put it into areas of where we've got a very clear area of deprivation there? Do we want that support to go into the centre, or do we want it to go into Melksham North? Now, I don't have the answers, but it raised questions, and it raised enough questions to really want to focus on that. I will be coming to the next area board chairs meeting with the data to try and explain the logic and for us all to see what we can do to try and tackle that from an area board perspective. We will also be looking through the community conversation perspective, which will not be channeled through area boards, but will be working alongside area boards as well. But details on that need to follow. I've not gone through it all with Kate. We've got some ideas, but they need working up.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that very full answer. I thought it was a very helpful answer, and it's certainly, I think, a view that many of us as area board chairs, if not all of us, are going to share, given that the business plan we've adopted as a council and your presence at an area board chairs meeting taking us through that, I think would be very helpful indeed. My second question, I'm trying to think of how best to phrase this. There's almost something about Ashley's absence and your point was at the beginning of this meeting is a very apt reminder of it, of an acceptance that COVID has somehow been and gone, and we're all now moving on from it. But of course, as we appreciate, firstly, it hasn't, and secondly, there are some quite longer-term implications of its impacts as such, and our latent demand reserve is a tangible financial observation of that. I wonder if I might ask perhaps Cabinet to just reflect on whether there is something within these metrics that might specifically look at the impacts of COVID. And if I give a tangible, you've been kind enough to give a tangible example, allow me to give one if I may, Richard. I met with the relatively new head of our secondary school in Malmesbury, and I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to any actually present today or those listening. And he talked specifically about the impact on certain year groups in the secondary school who were new to the secondary school at the time of lockdown, bubbles and home learning. And I'm sure Laura sat next to you is going to be very well aware of this. And if John here as chair of Children's Select will be very well aware of it. And he described the significant differences of the needs of those children as against some of the younger children who've now come through without those impacts. And of course, their older peer group who weren't as severely affected by them. And he made reference, and I'm aware of it through my membership of the multi-agency forum in the Malmesbury area, that there were similar implications for children who were newly arrived into primary schools, out of preschools or out of home, that were impacted by COVID. So I just wonder if there is something, Richard, it's not a very well-phrased question, forgive me, but it's a reflection, whether there is something where we might take account of the COVID impacts and the measures that we're specifically trying to take beyond the financial provision to compensate or to observe and monitor and then take action specifically in that regard. Hopefully that's a useful intervention. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. I mean, I think most of that work will be going on at a more granular level than we're reporting here, but you can see in this data the impacts of COVID. You can see on the children who are physically active, I think 43% during the lockdown period, which perhaps isn't surprising in that you didn't have formal teams meeting There are a number of others. The education gap in phonics grew larger in that period. So yes, there are several elements there. There's no definitive way, I think, of measuring COVID. There is a way of understanding COVID in a number of areas. The number of people on the housing register as well, and temporary accommodation, had a distinct pattern due to interventions that came both good and bad through COVID. Yeah. Do I have any further questions from members on this? In which case, I will move the recommendations or the proposals, which are to note the report. If I can, I haven't mentioned the risk register. We'll let that one go this time. Probably be the only time I don't. If I have a seconder, and all those in favour, thank you. If I then move on to the next item, item 11, schools admissions policies. Laura.
Thank you very much. I will keep this very simple. This happens every year. As you know, we have a statutory duty as a local authority to coordinate the admissions to all our schools. First of all, for maintained academies for primary and secondary, and for our, voluntary controlled and community schools. And this is the system of how each child is admitted to schools, both at primary and secondary level, and all the proposals are in the 4 appendices in your agenda pack. I want to reassure everyone here that this scheme has been consulted on widely, and bar one submission to the consultation, which was an issue that we sorted out. It's been unanimously approved. It includes the deadlines for submission, which is usually for reception year 3 and year 7. But we have also agreed that all in-year applications will be directly coordinated via Wiltshire Council. This is something that we choose to do as a local authority. And certainly the experience I've had recently, for instance, with Ukrainian refugees and so forth, that in-year application, I think it's very important that it's coordinated by us here at the council. There are only 2 very minor changes, and that is to a catchment area. One for the Minister VC Primary School and Princecroft Primary and schools. That's just on the catchment area. And the other point to make is that parents can now submit 8 weeks in advance of the required submission date. That's a minor change. So apart from that, I would just like to once again give my thanks to this incredibly well-organised team. When I think of the tens of thousands of applications that are processed in the time I've been lead member, I think I've had one parent contact me over the system. So it's indicative to me what a well-run system this is, and I ask the Cabinet to approve it.
Thank you, Laura. It's very easy when we get this every year to sort of say, yes, we've got this, we need to approve it, fine. But as you pointed out, there is a huge amount of work that goes into making it actually function. Cabinet, any comments? Ian?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Just one comment in addition to agreeing with what Laura has just said. And it's just a question out of interest, and that's in Appendix 1, point 8, and that refers to any school which operates criteria for selection by ability or aptitude. I'm just wanting to understand that we're not talking about grammar schools here. We are talking about grammar schools here primarily. But are we talking about any other schools? I'm just wondering whether Lackham would be around selection, about aptitude or ability, or...
No, it's just the grammar schools. And remember, this is just primary and secondary. It's not, no, there aren't any.
Because we haven't got to that point. Okay, fine. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone else? Comments?
Hey, can I ask that, I've lost it now, that you approve this paper, because it's not actually a decision.
Seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. We then come on to item 12, extension of the Wiltshire Special Educational Needs and Inclusion Strategy for a period of 12 months. Jane.
Our Wiltshire Special Educational Needs and Inclusion, which we call the Send and I strategy, details the areas of priority in relation to Send and I in Wiltshire, and it outlines the activities and developments needed to ensure progress in all of these priority areas. The current strategy runs for 3 years from 2020 until 2023, which means that a new strategy should be made available in the calendar year 2023. However, we are requesting an extension to the current Send and I strategy and presenting a new timetable for the creation of the next iteration if the if the extension is agreed by Cabinet. The reasons for these requests are twofold. The adoption of the 2023 strategy was delayed due to COVID. Instead of being able to take it to the Health and Wellbeing Board in spring 2020, it was delayed until September. And that led to inevitable delays in undertaking some of the activity within the current strategy. The second reason is that there are developments associated with the government's green paper, Right Support, Right Place, Right Time, which was published for consultation last summer, summer 2022, and it detailed proposed changes to local area arrangements for SEND, including the formation of a local area board. Consultation on this paper has now closed, but we await further detail on the shape of these proposals in future. This means that there are some key areas about which at the current time we remain unclear. So it'd be helpful if we knew what the green paper was going to finally say before we write our next paper to ensure we're fully aligned with national policies. If granted, during the extension year, the local area will continue, and I want to say this very clearly, it's unwavering work to create an environment where all children and young people with SEND and their families will have a voice that is heard. They will know how to access and be able to access the joined up support they need to thrive in their communities, to enjoy life and reach their full potential. I also want to be clear, although we were delayed on some areas, there are several strong outcomes from our current strategy which are becoming a reality over the next year. For example, there are additional school places will be provided through the opening of Sale School in Salisbury, Silverwood School in Roud, and the development of resource bases in selected secondary and primary schools across the county. We are currently consulting on substantial refurbishment of Silverwood School, campuses at Chippenham and Trowbridge as specialist primary provision. There will also be enhanced engagement with children and young people through the SEND Pioneer programme, which ensures grassroots involvement in developing, designing, implementing and evaluating what works for those young people. It will give children and young people with SEND a strong voice, influencing health and social care services that will have a direct impact on their lives, as well as helping to shape their communities into positive and inclusive spaces. As you heard previously, we're working with the DFE on developing better value, and ordinarily available provision for all learners, which we're calling OPAL, will be adopted by all schools to develop a consistent approach across education settings for those with additional needs. So our proposals are that an extension of a year is agreed for the current Wiltshire SEND and I strategy due to the delay in COVID in adopting the current strategy document and associated delay in undertaking some elements of identified activity and the developments associated with the Green Paper. Co-production activity for the next Wiltshire SEND and I strategy will commence in autumn 2023, with a finalised strategy being available in summer 2024 and will be shared with the Health and Wellbeing Board for approval as soon after completion as possible.
Thank you. Further comments from Cabinet. Laura.
I support this, and I think what's interesting, although we're asking for a delay, I think what's interesting is the amount of work that Jane's just outlined is indicative of what goes on in this department. It is such a busy department with so much going on, and we have made huge strides in the last few years, and I'm very proud of the work that they're doing. And I think to Gavin's point about how we're delivering better value and all the projects that we're doing to increase the amount of provision within mainstream and to try and head off problems before they start is just part of this wider system of excellence that we've always talked about in this area. So I certainly support us delaying this strategy, but it doesn't mean that we're doing nothing whilst we're waiting for the strategy to come into place. This is something that we have really, really focused our attention on in the last few years.
Thank you. According to my list, do we not have any comments on input from scrutiny on this? No. Okay, so I will come to Ian.
I don't think I've got anything to add. Thank you.
Any further comments from members? In which case, sorry, you need to put the mic on. Sorry.
The proposals as I just read them out.
Seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. We then come back to Laura, Children's Residential Placements Block Contract.
Thank you. And I did refer to this earlier when we were asked about, sorry, I'm having problems with my computer here. When John was raising the issue of whether there will be funds available for if our number of children in care increase, but the point I made was really it's the placements that is cost, which is a real issue for us. And I think, as everyone would know, we want every child to stay with their parents, but if they can't, and they need to come into care, and a family placement with a foster family isn't right for them, then sometimes they need residential care. But what we want is that residential care to be in county wherever possible, so that they can maintain their links, go to school locally, and do all the things that one would hope for any child who lives in Wiltshire. And of course, that residential care is expensive. In 1920, years 2019 to 20, 43 young people were in residential care at a cost of 6.3 million. The following year, 21-22, 37 young people were in residential care, and that was 7.4 million. And our forecast for 36 further children next year is 8.2 million. So this is just a rising figure. And that isn't due to vast numbers of more children coming into residential care. In fact, those numbers are reducing, but the cost is going up. So we have to have a new approach. We don't want high cost out of county systems, which is what we have to a certain extent at the moment. So those of you with good memories will remember that in September 21, we agreed that Wiltshire Council would buy residential homes and lease them to an external provider on a peppercorn rent with a full repairing lease. So that's 1.5 million to buy 2 homes, and we would include, in addition, a spa house in Melksham. The good news is that we made a successful bid to the DFE and received an extra £900,000, which we can add to our pot or take away from our pot, Nick, so that we don't have to use our money. So we are putting out to tender the block contract to an external residential care provider to provide 12 places in Wiltshire for Wiltshire children and young people, which will include an annual review. And the officers continue to prepare and complete the tender programme and award and implement a new block contract for the children's residential care by April this year. And talking to officers, we hope this to be in place for the summer. And so those are my proposals, and I hope that people here would be happy to accept that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Again, do we have any questions on that? Yeah, Nick.
It's not so much of a question, but a comment. I think you highlighted, Laura, the challenges of us placing children outside of initially their families and then Wiltshire. Anything that we can do to keep the looked after children as close to their parents and their families by retaining them within Wiltshire is much better for their mental health, and of course does come with some financial benefits as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. If I then come to John as Chair of Children's Select.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers who provided a briefing on this for myself and the Vice Chair. Whilst the committee hasn't discussed this specific thing in detail, it's discussed a lot of the surrounding issues to it, and in every way we've discussed this solution is good news for the concerns that have been raised. Very much the points that Councillor Holder was just making now about distance from home and getting people more local, but particularly also, of course, the reduced financial strain that will come as a result of bringing the young people in-house. But actually, it's more important for us in terms of the quality of life for these young people, being able to stay closer to their own communities is outstanding. I am forced to slightly smile to myself about that way. You know, we have the big circle in local government where everything goes round the circle. And I'm reflecting upon the very first question I asked Councillor Mays when she became the Cabinet Member for Children's Services was about what we were going to do with the disused children's home on Spa Road in my ward. which then became Aspire House and will now be becoming a children's home again. But it is good to see that returning. It's good to see these placements coming in county because they will provide a much better environment for our young people. So good news.
Thank you. Do we have then any comments from Ian?
Yes, thank you, Richard. It is good news. It's welcome, and I congratulate Laura and her team and the officers for making it happen. I guess my only question is, in terms of the numbers of young people that are currently in accommodation out of county, whether that's principally around safeguarding, or whether there are other reasons and issues why we've traditionally had such a large number of young people out of Wiltshire. Thank you.
Obviously, safeguarding comes into it, but more importantly, we haven't been able to meet their needs in the county, and that's what I feel more strongly about. That there are some children for whom their needs are very, very complex, and there will always be some that we will never be able to accommodate here because the needs are so specialist. But wherever possible, we want them to stay in Wiltshire, and that's what part of that contract will be, is to ensure that the sort of therapeutic work, the sort of work that needs that the children and support that the children need will be part of that contract. And I think it's important. I have that sort of awful image of my head of children's homes with, vast dormitories of children in institutions. These are homes in a street that you wouldn't know were a home when you walk past them, have any official capacity. And there'll be 3 or 4 bedroom houses where a child can just watch TV, hang out, do their homework, cook meals, as though they were part of a normal family home. And I think part of that will be part of their recovery. But there will be specialists in there who will be giving them the right support, and that will be part of the contract.
Thank you. Any further questions? So we've got the proposals.
Yes, the proposals are on page 382, and I propose them. Would anyone
Again,
accept
second them? All those in favour? Thank you. Item 14, minor amendments to the Council's housing allocation policy. Phil.
Thank you. So, as a unitary authority with statutory responsibility for a number of housing services, Wiltshire Council holds and manages the housing register. Now, being on the register provides many of our residents with access to affordable housing, either through us and the HRA, or with a housing association. Now, it's our responsibility to assess the needs of residents on the register and band them according to priority need, one the greatest for the lowest. Now, the paper you've got before you, the proposals for Cabinet to consider, are 4 minor amendments to the register that will enable us to better serve the residents, but also so that the register more effectively aligns with our business plan objectives of having the right housing and living well together. So I'm just going to go through those 4 amendments I'd like us to consider. So the first one is to move care experienced young people into band 1. Now, we're the corporate parents to a number of young people, as we've just heard, and currently they're in band 1 up until the age of 21, so they're our highest priority. This amendment is to move that age up to 25. That's in line with our corporate responsibility and DfE recommendations. So that's the first amendment. The second one is with regard to under-occupiers. Now, some of our residents are under-occupying their homes. They've got more bedrooms than they need. As a result, they're spending more on their homes than is necessary. And this recommendation will move those individuals into band 1 when they're looking to downsize. So there'll be a higher priority. It will make it much easier for them to downsize, reducing their costs, but also freeing up larger properties than for others in greater housing need to move into. The third is with regard to our homeless relief duty. Now, there are residents and some people in Wiltshire who are owed full homelessness relief, and they're currently in band 1. Now, those individuals who are at risk of homelessness are currently in band 2. Now, the recommendation here will move those who are currently in band 2 into the exclusion group. So whilst they're not moving up to band 1, it does mean that that will help us allocate them into homes that currently they're excluded from. And they're ones that would normally have a local connection attached to them as rural exception site housing, or specifically for a 106 agreement. So it gives them an opportunity to bid, not for those particular properties, but because they're excluded, but it would allow them to be ranked higher in terms of local connection for other properties. Okay, so the final one is regard to verbal offers. Now, what we find is when residents refuse offers of accommodation twice, they get removed from the register. And in many cases, they refuse properties for quite valid reasons. But because they've received a verbal offer, our council staff have not had the chance to properly assess those offers and therefore ascertain the suitability of that accommodation. And what's happening is occasionally some individuals get removed from the register because of that. So what we want to do is to change the system slightly so all offers have to be made in writing, thereby giving our officers a chance to assess those properties if the individual finds that feels they're not suitable for their needs, and therefore eliminate that risk of people being removed from the housing register. Okay, so they're the 4 proposals that are included within the report, and essentially I'm quite happy to take questions. Go with these.
Thank you. Sorry, Laura, you wanted to come in first.
Well, I am absolutely delighted that we've got care leavers now up to the age of 25 being given priority band 1 status. And I want to thank everybody who's been involved in making this happen. We've been edging away towards this for a long time, and I think it's just indicative of us as a council and our commitment to our care leavers, and I'm just very grateful to everybody and fully support it. Thank you.
Thanks. I would agree. I'm always look very carefully at anything we're doing with the allocations policy. I think we need to be very careful around unintended consequences. I don't think we're going to be hitting any here. I think what we're doing makes sense and will improve the allocations policy. I'm happy with it. Anything else from Cabinet? So if we then ask Bob, as Vice Chair of Environment Select, did you have any comments?
No comments, but we're pleased to see those amendments.
Thank you. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Richard. It seems to me these make perfect sense. I was delighted in terms of the care leavers, and I think whoever came up with the idea of putting into band 1 residents with, let's put it this way, more bedrooms than they require in order to free up those properties, in order to make those properties available to people that need larger properties. I think that's inspired, and so I congratulate whoever came up with that. I suppose my broader point, because it all makes perfect sense, is that if more people are going into band 1 and nobody's dropping out of band 1, then the issue then becomes supply of housing, because we've got more people. If we haven't got more homes, then with the exception possibly of the extra or excess bedroom cases, I'm not sure whether we're, but please tell me we are, that we're any further forward. I'm not trying to be negative, but it just seems to me if we've got more people in band 1 and no greater supply, whether the process speeds up or not, others will have a much better view in that respect. And can I just make a plea? I think there's a reference in the paper to the fact there will be a full review of allocations coming up in this year, 2023. And it's just a couple of points. One is something that many colleagues will have experienced where people on the waiting list are made offers, but often the offers are made in locations that absolutely don't suit in terms of jobs, in terms of children, and therefore whether there's any way of looking at that. And I've had that certainly in the past where people are asked to move towns, which is completely and utterly impractical. So I'm just wondering if there's a way of looking at that while we're on the subject. But overall, I think the proposal makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, and it's to some extent out with our control, the fundamental issue, of course, is more supply in order to then make the additional numbers in that first band actually realise their dream of moving to a better and more appropriate home. Thank you.
Thanks. Phil?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so there's quite a bit there. You're right, yeah. Moving people who want to downsize into band 1 will increase the velocity within the market, so that should free up those larger properties, thereby making life a bit easier for some. In terms of the young people who will be staying on band 1 until the age of 25, that will affect very few people. So in terms of increasing the size, it's not significant and it's not beyond what we're kind of currently doing anyway. You mentioned obviously, if you increase the size of band 1, you increase the need for affordable housing. Well, actually, there's a significant need anyway. So we're just moving people potentially from band 2 into band 1. One element of the policy is just to remove the exclusions, to move the homelessness relief in the band twos into that exclusion group. So again, that doesn't move them into band one, it just improves our ability to allocate them. So I think that largely addresses those. Yet we are taking the actual allocations policy wholesale through a complete review, and that will be going to environmental select. So there'll be plenty of opportunity there for people to get involved and share their views and hopefully help shape that policy moving forward. And then finally, the other thing you mentioned, which is almost escaping me, is the number of properties that are coming forward. Yeah, as you know, a lot of the affordable properties coming forward do come from 106 agreements, and they are part of larger developments that are going through with larger housing developments. And then, of course, we have some that we're developing with the HRA. Obviously, there's rural exception sites too that are coming on stream. Where we are at the moment, and we did have this recently come up at the environmental select, and we have more properties, or last year we had more properties coming on to the affordable register than we're actually targeted to. So we were above target in terms of overall delivery, and that included and that figure, which derives back from the local plan, which again we know we're reviewing, is itself taking into account the right to buys. So it's based on projected growth. Now, obviously, all of that, again, will be reviewed, and whether that figure's revised up or down or sideways, we'll wait to see. But it's certainly something we're all feeding into.
I think if I just add one sort of further observation there, given the way that we work the local connection, where you will be at a highest priority for an area you have a local connection to, that's great if you're in somewhere like Salisbury or Chippenham or Trowbridge, where you've got a higher turnover of housing. If you're in some of the more rural communities, it can be very difficult, which can result then in people who are sitting on a register for longer being offered properties elsewhere. It's also why the Council House building programme we're running has been focusing on villages wherever we can. Too many, and I will bash housing associations on this, too many housing associations are looking to dispose of rural properties. They're harder to maintain. They've got to have people driving around, and they then replace them in an urban area somewhere nearby. Really, that isn't good enough. We've got to have as much, particularly social rent housing, as possible in our villages, which is why has been the key emphasis of our build programme.
Can I just, if I may, come back on one point, and that is, again, one of the issues that I come across a lot, and I suspect colleagues do too, is the simple lack of larger properties. So either large families in terms of parents and kids, or a lot of young adults that can't leave home for a raft of different reasons. And so you'll talk to the housing association and they'll say, well, we have a distinct, despite the number of units that are coming via 106, we have a distinct dearth of larger properties. And I'm just wondering, because I don't know the answer, the question is whether through the planning process, our officers can insist on a larger number of larger properties as part of the affordable element of any scheme that this authority consents. And one would imagine that would also come through the 106, I guess.
Gosh, who wants to take this? Do you want me to take this? Go on. I mean, because this is covering a number of areas. We have a constant struggle there with the provision of affordable housing, where developers, because it's less profitable, will potentially be looking for the average 2-3-bed unit. They're easier for them to dispose of in terms of finding registered providers who are willing to take them on. To an extent, it is dictated by need, but need fluctuates over time, and development works relatively slowly. So linking that need to developments is tough. And you do occasionally get cases where you may suddenly need to find accommodation for 10 people, at which point all you're looking at theoretically doing is taking two houses that become vacant together, connecting them and using them. There really isn't an easy solution to this until we come back to the concept of building our own to try and meet where we see sustained patterns of demand in certain areas. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything there. Yeah, go on, Phil.
Yeah, and it was also just a follow-up. I mean, it is challenging because those bigger properties are quite difficult for some of the housing associations to let once they're then void. And for many people, they would actually be under-occupying those larger homes. So from a housing association's perspective, it's not always attractive in terms of their business plan. However, that aside, you also mentioned there's an issue around people struggling to find homes locally, and therefore they have to, they're being offered properties that are further away. The process is that people bid for homes, so they identify the ones on the register that are suitable for their needs, and then they bid for those. So it's really down to whether an individual. Okay, it is challenging. There's not always homes available in their local community. And, it is a ration service, so that's always going to be one of the challenges. As Councillor Clover said, the numbers do fluctuate. So if you've got ample supply one year, you have a surplus the next. And of course, that's extremely challenging too. But obviously, we're not there at the moment because we've got such high pressures anyway. But okay, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Were there any further questions? Yes, John.
Chair, I just wanted to join Laura's celebration that our care leavers will go into band one. This has been a recommendation from scrutiny on a number of occasions in various forms. I know how much of a challenge it potentially has been. I'm beside myself with delight that is now the case. It's not just the fact that we're doing it, it's actually the message to those young people that as their corporate parents, we do care enough to say that they are a priority. And I think sometimes we don't realise how powerful messages can be as much as actually actions. So congratulations. I mean, the second part of it, common sense. Third part of it, I'm not sure I entirely understood, Phil, but please don't make me try to. But the first part of it, really well done. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I think it's got to be done hand in hand with ensuring that tenancy sustainment continues. The bit that really, really worries me with care leavers is the potential to then see them housed somewhere where they fail to sustain a tenancy and then end up again in a situation where they're dealing with potential credit histories. And we've got to make sure it goes hand in hand, given the efforts that I'm undergoing with my children at the moment, albeit on a much minor scale at university with their housing issues and advice. That advice is something that I think young people probably find quite invaluable at that point as to how to deal with that process.
Just to come back on that then, Chair, which is I would love to sit down and reopen the discussion on training flats again. We never quite managed to get the training flats going, did we, if I remember correctly? But the more training flats we can have to help our care leavers understand all those things you're talking about, the better. But Laura's face tells me maybe they did get going.
Yes, we are looking at that, John.
They didn't get going, but we are still looking.
No, but the concept, it's very hard to find houses that we can use as houses of multiple occupancy they've got to sit outside of the HRA because otherwise you're giving a lifetime tenure into them, which is not appropriate. It's one of the reasons that there's 10 million being released to address housing need from reserves. Okay, if we then move on to any other questions? No? If Phil, you move them. Again, you've already been through it, don't read them.
Yeah, so I just want to propose the recommendations in the paper.
Seconded, all in favour? Thank you. Oh, sorry, on the admissions. We've just voted on the admissions policy, haven't we?
The previous one, not the allocations, the admissions policy a couple of items ago. It was proposed, we didn't actually have a...
Okay, I'm sure, fine, okay. Apparently we need to go back to have a formal vote on schools admission. I'm sure we did, but okay. Back to item 11. It was proposed and seconded. Can we just have a formal vote to show that we agree the schools admissions policy?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, if we then jump to the last item, the Wiltshire Council Housing Board annual report.
Okay,
Phil, again, over to you.
Yeah, me again. So, this paper sets out the annual report of the Wiltshire Council Housing Board. Now, the Housing Board meet regularly to scrutinise the activities of the HRA with a particular focus on ensuring that there's a prudent business plan in place and that officers are working towards improving the quality of the service provided and meeting the objectives set out. So the report complies with the terms of reference, requiring updates being provided to Cabinet on its activity. It also supports our business plan objectives with regard to empowering communities, supporting a thriving economy, skilled workforce, mitigating climate challenges, having well-connected communities, the right housing, evidence-based decisions, as well as a range of other priorities too. So the Housing Board itself has 3 subgroups. We've got a place subgroup, pounds subgroup, and people subgroup, each of those scrutinising and looking at their own particular focus around that. And these feed into the Housing Board. There's also a challenge and change group that sits underneath it too. Now, the key achievements of the HRA so far, which are in the report, I'm just going to give you a few of the sort of headlines here, give an indication of the upcoming work. I mean, the report there, the update's quite comprehensive, so you know, I'm happy to take questions at the end. But in terms of what's happened so far then, well, the key achievements of the HRA this year include the enhancing of the tenancy support, which I know we already touched upon tonight, and how crucial that's been in improving people's financial circumstances. But there's been a lot of work that's gone into clearing the non-emergency repairs backlog that was hanging over from a couple of years ago, continuing with the emergency repairs and they're being expedited and run through the system, focusing on the HEAP programme, which is our housing energy efficiency programme, and targeting those properties with the greatest potential. Other key achievements include the increase in the estate inspections, monitoring progress in the Council House Build programme, monitoring the KPIs and KPIs, sorry, I'm adjusting to new glasses, KPIs and Star Tenant Satisfaction Survey, the digital engagement programme through the iHousing portal, and the resident engagement plan. Now, upcoming work, which is also listed, includes continued scrutiny of the business plan, the HEAP programme, the Council House Build programme, continuing to monitor the actions of the STAR survey and implementing reforms to the social housing, implementing the reforms of the social housing white paper. Okay, so there's quite a bit there. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those, although due to some staffing moves, obviously, Simon Hendy's no longer kicking around, he's left us, but I can take questions, any technical ones I can go back to officers with and hopefully get a response to those.
Thank you. I don't have any questions apart from to comment that I now look on with interest from a distance about the operation of the Housing Board. From what I can see, it's still doing its job, which is great. It's been a really good tool for us, and I hope it continues to be. Any other comments from Cabinet? In which case, I believe, Bob, any comments from the Environment Select?
Thank you, Chairman. The Housing Board annual report was discussed at the Environmental Select Committee meeting of the 4th of January. The Select Committee had received the Housing Board's annual report on several occasions before and welcomed the opportunity to discuss. We noted that some of the performance indicators required improvement, but were reassured that actions were being taken to address these issues. We also sought details on the number of council tenancies, how tenants were communicated with, and the assistance being provided to obtain benefits and reliefs for fuel hardship. We've asked to receive the next annual report with those particular items in mind, and we look forward to receiving that in due course.
Thank you. If we then come on to Ian.
Chairman, nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from members? In which case, we will then move to the vote on that. The proposal is that we note it, so I'll second it. All those in favour? Thank you. I am tempted to mess up whatever sweepstake winner we've now got from the officer group on the timing of the finishing of this meeting, but I will be kind to whoever is winning and not put in any urgent items. So at that point, thank you all very much, and see you at full council for Sports Day.